Chapter 594. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. Feng Haiyang stared at the tribulation water in front of him. In the torrential turbid tide, there were more than 30 shadows of demons. They were like fish swimming in the stream, swaying back and forth. From time to time, there would be a rustling sound that lingered in his ears like whispers. In his plan, he would need at least 100 demons to have the confidence to fight with the disciples of Shenmen. These were far from enough. Just as he was about to cultivate again, he suddenly felt a violent tremor in his sleeve, as if the Junyang pot was jumping non-stop. He had no choice but to stop halfway and take out the treasured pot from his sleeve. When he held it in his hand, it was still struggling and trembling. It was as if it would fly away if he let go of it. He could not help but frown. The Junyang pot and the star stone were originally one. In this world, the spiritual vigor would rotate once every 108 days. At that time, the spiritual pot would move in the void and go somewhere else. He would need the talisman order to find it again. It seemed that because the time was approaching, the spiritual vigor on the pot had accumulated and was ready to move. Therefore, the movement was getting louder and louder. Once the treasure pot moved, it would be extremely difficult to find it again. He did not have absolute confidence. What worried him was that if the pot went to the other side of the star stone and happened to be found by the disciples of Shenmen, they would take Junyang's chi of essence. Then all his hard work would be in vain. For the 6 demon sects, stopping Shenmen from taking Junyang's chi of essence was the most important thing in this mystical demon competition. The demon sects were in a prosperous state. If they could get the chi of essence, it would be the icing on the cake. However, if Shenmen could not get it, it would be one disaster after another. Therefore, even if the demon sects did not get anything, as long as they successfully stopped Shenmen, they would win this sword battle. After all, the demon sects had been suppressed by Shenmen for thousands of years. Their decline could not be reversed overnight. If they won the sword battle, it would have an extraordinary significance. For the disciples of the demon sects, it would have an inspiring effect. When Feng Haiyang returned to the sect, his reputation would increase greatly. He would be the first among his peers. Even those who had entered the 3rd stage of Yuanying realm before him would not be able to compete with him. They would not be able to compete with him. In this way, he would be supported by the sect and become a cave in 100 years. It was not an extravagant hope. Comparing the Yuanying realm and the manifestation realm, the difference could be said to be like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Once a cultivator stepped into the Yuanying realm, they would transform from a chess piece to a player. So Feng Haiyang had long since secretly resolved that he would strive for this fortune no matter what. Thinking of this, his face showed a serious expression. He seemed to be calculating something important. After thinking seriously for a while, he finally made up his mind. He first put away the Junyang pot, then took out the 2nd talisman from his sleeve pocket and shook it open. He gently guided the pot, and another ball of Junyang's energy was pulled out from the mouth of the pot. Feng Haiyang roared and channeled his mana. 33 demons flew out from the calamity water and hovered in midair. When they saw the ball of spiritual chi, their eyes filled with greed. They wanted to take a bite out of it, but Feng Haiyang didn't order them to. They didn't dare to approach it. They just kept circling around it. Feng Haiyang looked at the energy in his hand with pity. If this ball of Junyang's energy was obtained by a 3rd stage of Yuanying realm cultivator, as long as the opportunity came, they could use it to enter the Grotto Heaven realm. Now, he was going to feed it to the demons. It was really an extravagant move. If the elders of the demon sects found out about this, they would probably punish him severely. However, the number of demons he refined was still not enough to fight against the Shenmen. Therefore, he could only use this method to increase the power of the demons to make up for the shortcomings. As long as he defeated the Shenmen, he could get more than 10 portions of Junyang's energy. However, if he did not win, even if he took it back, he might not be able to use it. Thinking of this, he was even more determined. He raised his hand and threw the energy out. When the demons saw this, they immediately swarmed over and tried to tear this ball of energy into pieces. However, this energy was strange. It could only be refined at once, and it could not be separated by Taoist spells or magic treasures. Therefore, after a long time, they could not tear even a strand of it. The 33 demons had their own intelligence. After circling around, they suddenly roared in unison. They suddenly combined their bodies and turned into one. They opened their mouths and sucked the ball of energy down. With a shrill cry, they threw it into the tribulation water. In just a moment, many inexplicable changes occurred. Their bodies seemed real and illusory, but now, they looked like a ball of clear qi. If one did not look closely, it would be hard to notice. Only then did Feng Haiyang feel happy. However, the kulpa water suddenly began to churn as if it was boiling. A powerful force rushed up and shook his chest. His expression changed, and he hurriedly used a spell to separate the demon heads. More than 20 of the demon heads suddenly exploded and floated away. It was obvious that they could not withstand the power of the essence qi. Feng Haiyang's expression became serious. He held his breath and focused. He tried to use his mana to help the remaining demons pass the stage. After 7 days, he finally stabilized the tribulation water and was no longer tortured by the energy. During this process, another 9 demons dissipated one after another. At this point, only 3 demons remained. He shook his head. The tribulation water spun, and the 30 demons that had exploded were refined again. However, they couldn't compare to the remaining 3 demons. He thought to himself, although it is not as good as I thought, with these 3 demons that have been nourished by Jun Yang's energy, I can still fight with the Xianmen. While he was thinking, his arms suddenly shook. The Jun Yang kettle rushed out of his sleeve. It flashed for a moment and disappeared. Feng Haiyang laughed and stood up. With a shake of his body, he released more than 1,000 demon generals and ordered them to search for the Jun Yang treasured kettle. With the help of the demons, he had an advantage in finding the Jun Yang kettle. However, he could not guarantee that he would be lucky enough to find the Jun Yang kettle before the Xianmen. Therefore, he could only fight with the disciples of the Xianmen and take the initiative. It would be best if he could kill all the disciples of the Celestial Sect of Wonders with just the 30 or so demons in his hands. If that was not possible, he had to stall the other party before the group of demons found the Jun Yang pot again. He let out a long roar, spread his sleeves, and activated his escape technique. He turned into a ball of surging yellow smoke and soared into the sky. On the Star-Stone Road, the disciples of the Xianmen who came for the sword duel were sitting on a high cliff. They were concentrating on controlling their qi and breathing spiritual vigor. Although the thousands of demons had not left, they could only stop outside because they were blocked by the formation. They could not come in and disturb the place. The spiritual qi here was obtained from the star stone outside the 9th heaven. Although after falling to the 2nd heaven, 80 to 90% of the spiritual qi had dissipated, it was still far better than a paradise. It was similar to the spirit cave in the Donghua continent. It was an excellent place to cultivate the mind. 1 year of cultivation here was equivalent to 10 years of cultivation in the outside world. After these days, everyone's cultivation had improved greatly. Zhang Yan sat cross-legged on a large green rock. At this moment, the cloud above his head had already condensed to the point of seeming material, and its glow was like a rainbow that glowed with 5 colors. Beside this cloud was another cloud that had already slowly condensed into form. However, it was still weak, and it seemed as if it would scatter with a gust of wind. It drifted indeterminately, and as it breathed in and out, this cloud revolved ceaselessly. At this moment, there was a sudden movement in the spiritual qi. He immediately felt it. His eyelids moved slightly. He opened his eyes and saw that a talisman that was originally floating in the air had burned and turned into ashes. This talisman was given by Elder Shen earlier. There was a spell on it. After 100 days, the talisman would burn and disturb the spiritual qi, waking everyone up from their meditation. Zhang Yan observed silently and noticed that 100 days had passed and his mana had increased by a little. He couldn't help but think to himself, what a pity, if I could get the help of the Qian Tian Jun Yang essence qi during my cultivation, I would definitely be able to get twice the result with half the effort and my advancement would be able to improve a little more. In the past, The cultivators who entered the Xianmen could cultivate in peace because there was no demon sect to fight with them for the talisman. Those who were promised by their masters could even get some Junyang essence qi for their own use. Their cultivation improved even faster. But this sword duel was different because there were demon sect disciples watching from the side. Not only did they not have the essence qi to support them, they had to be vigilant at all times. Huoxian spat out a golden red light from his mouth. He then slowly retracted his qi dynamic and opened his eyes. Zhong Muqing and Luo Qingyu woke up one after another. When they looked over, they saw that the two clouds above Huoxian's head had turned from illusory to solid, and the third cloud had a faint shadow. It was obvious that his cultivation had improved greatly. Among the top 10 disciples of the Qinsong school, Huoxian was the first one to enter the Yuanning state. He achieved nascent soul more than 60 years and his foundation was stable. If he could cultivate for another 1 or 2 years without any distractions, he would be able to step into the second Yuanning state. Every time the star stone returned to the second heaven, it would stay for 3 years. When the spiritual opportunity was activated, it would return to the outside of the 9th heaven. It would be enough if he could cultivate step by step. However, everyone knew that Feng Haiyang would not give them such a chance. After Huoxian retracted his qi dynamic, he looked around and saw that the Yang couple and Elder Shen had also retracted their cultivation. He said, "Everyone, it has been more than 100 days. The Junyang pot must have gone somewhere else. If Feng Haiyang wants to make a move, it will be within these few days. We need to be careful." Yang Bai's expression changed slightly. He asked, "What if he doesn't come?" Huoxian said, "That's easy. Junior brother Zhang has the mirror with him. We can go and find the Junyang pot together." Yang Bai nodded. He suddenly thought of something and said, "Zhenren Sun has been alone for the past 100 days. I wonder how he is doing?" Luo Qingyu smiled and said, "Although Zhenren Sun does not have the protection of the formation, he has the sword pellet with him. He will give us a warning when there is danger. Moreover, the place where he cultivates is not far from us. Even if Feng Haiyang went to look for him, how would there be no movement? Since there is no news, he should be fine." Sun Huaying suddenly left that day. After that, he sent a letter back. He mentioned that the cultivation method in the sect was unique and needed another place to cultivate. Although he said it politely, everyone knew that this Shaoqing disciple was arrogant. He did not want to enter the 4 symbols profound formation to cultivate. He did not want to owe the Qinsong school a favor. They could not force him and could only let him be. While they were talking, Zhang Yan suddenly noticed something strange. He immediately turned his gaze and saw that a few miles to the west, there was a stream of black water falling from the sky with great momentum. But in the blink of an eye, another sword light soared up and glowed with a brilliance of 100 zhang in the air, fiercely slashing down. Chapter 595. Sun Huang flew up on her sword and with a flick of her sleeve, a sword mark flew out like a rainbow. It immediately tore apart a portion of the tribulation water that was rushing over. Within the mist that dispersed, 30 devils burst out with a bang and attacked various parts of his body. He shouted coldly and activated the supernatural power, so near, yet worlds apart. The sword light kept jumping within 1,000 feet, like a golden carp leaping over the waves, appearing and disappearing in a flash. Every strike of the sword accurately cut open the demon head. As long as it was cut open, the essence, qi, and spells within it would all collapse. After the last strike, the sword gleam suddenly flashed and retracted from its original position. It suddenly jumped out 150 feet away and sliced Feng Haiyang's head off. Then, the sword did not stop there. It spun 9 times and chopped off Feng Haiyang's torso and limbs. Then, the sword hummed as it turned into a ray of light and returned to Feng Haiyang's side. Seeing Feng Haiyang's body parts falling into the tribulation water, Sun Huaying's expression did not change. Just by looking at the tribulation water, he knew that he did not manage to kill Feng Haiyang. However, that wasn't his objective. He'd found out from the Yang couple that regardless of whether the body that had been slashed was real or fake, there would always be a gap after it was reborn. Moreover, he'd created a sufficient commotion with the first sword strike just now, in order to attract everyone's attention. This period of time would be sufficient for Huoxian and the rest to rush over to help. As expected, the tribulation water shook 100 feet away. When the sound of tide was heard, Feng Haiyang emerged from the water unscathed with his yellow robe wrapped around his body. Sun Huang pinched the sword formula and tried to use the sword pill to sense. However, after some investigation, he felt that the qi dynamic was disturbed and it was hard to grasp. He could not tell whether the person standing in front of him was real or fake. He frowned. This was probably not only because Feng Haiyang's cultivation level was higher than his, but also because the illusionary tribulation water of thousand spirits was good at changing and it could cover his qi dynamic. That was why he could not see where the real body was. On the other side, sensing that Feng Haiyang had arrived, Huoxian and the rest immediately removed the four symbols formation and rode on the astral wind. Rushing over to help, Zhang Yan brandished his sword and flew into the air. He had always been cautious and did not rush forward. Instead, he circled around the area. He wanted to see if there were any strange arrangements. Sun Huang was a Shaoqing disciple. Even a third-layer Yuanying cultivator like Feng Haiyang had to last a moment against her. It was definitely not a difficult task. However, the devil sex methods were treacherous and he had to be on his guard, especially when the thousands of devils had been wandering outside for more than 100 days. If there really was a trap left behind and he rushed in, not only would he not be able to save the people, he would also easily get himself into trouble. They were only a few miles away from Sun Huang. They would arrive in the blink of an eye. Originally, Zhang Yan's speed was the fastest among them, but with such a delay, he fell behind. The first to arrive were the young couple. The couple used the gung metal sword qi to fly, so their speed could be considered excellent. Even though they were not as fast as Zhang Yan and Sun Huang, they were still faster than Huoxian and the other two. Now, with the help of the Dark Azure Sect's disciples, their confidence was greatly boosted. Yang Bai also felt that this battle was related to Yuan Yang's sect's reputation, and they couldn't afford to back off anymore. When he got close, he did not have the time to greet Sun Huang. He let out a roar and drove the sword plate above him, causing a violent sword rain to erupt. His wife, Zhu Xian, had a telepathic connection with him. She could tell that he had used his full strength this time, so she did not hold back her magic power. She shouted and moved the sword plate, causing a waterfall of sword qi to spread out. They worked together and poured down like a tide. As a Shaoqing disciple, how could Sun Huang miss such an opportunity? She immediately made a hand seal, and a sword light suddenly appeared 30 meters in front of Feng Haiyang, slashing horizontally. However, this time, a demon whose form could not be identified leaped out of the water of tribulation and collided head-on with the sword. With a clang, the sword pill was blocked. Sun Huang could not help but raise his eyebrows, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. It was not because the sword did not cut through the devil, but because he was thinking that it was not normal for Feng Haiyang to use a devil to block the sword. Did that mean that this person's real body was the one before him? Feng Haiyang laughed out loud and waved his sleeves. More than 10 demons flew up to meet the young couple's sword qi. The 5 demons at the front suddenly turned incorporeal and passed through the sword qi without any hindrance. Then, the 5 demon heads collided with the sword qi with a shrill sound. However, a series of clanging sounds could be heard. The ferocious sword qi did not even manage to cut through a single demon head. They were all blocked. This round of attacks did not pose any threat to Feng Haiyang. Yang Bai and his wife could not help but be shocked. Although this sword qi was not their most incisive technique, it was easy for them to kill devils and filthy things with the thousands of sword lights. However, these 10 devils seemed to have something special about them. They were completely unharmed when they faced them head-on. However, there was no time for them to think too much about it. The 5 devils had already charged forward. Fortunately, perhaps due to the changes, their speed was not fast, so the husband and wife could deal with them easily. They made hand seals at the same time and spun the sword board. They no longer scattered the sword lights, but gathered them into 2 shining golden swords that hung above their heads. Because they could change between incorporeal and incorporeal, one of them used the yang technique, while the other used the yin technique. Then they combined the two swords, shouted in unison, and pointed down with their fingers, killing the sword lights with all their might. The yin technique and the yang technique were used together, so no matter how the devils changed, they would be able to hit them. However, just as the sword lights were about to hit them, the 5 devils suddenly spread out and scurried away. They then turned in the air and went around the sword lights. Suddenly, their bodies became incorporeal and incorporeal, and they attacked where the 2 people were. Their speed was more than twice as fast as before. This sudden attack could be said to be completely unexpected. Yang Bai and his wife did not expect that these devils would deliberately pretend to be flying slowly. When they got close to the 2 people, they suddenly revealed their ferocious fangs. Originally, they would not have been so careless. It was just that Feng Haiyang was being held back by Sun Huaying. According to common sense, it was not very possible for him to split his attention to control his Dao technique to such a high level. Therefore, in this instant, an opening that should not have appeared. At the 3rd level of Calamity Water, the devils were completely different from before. Their flying speed was already similar to the Yellow Springs escape art, and they could change back and forth between real and fake. However, this was not what made them powerful. Instead, they had their own intelligence and they knew how to deal with their enemies. If the eye of Feng Haiyang refined all 3,000 devils and used it with the Heaven and Earth Seal technique, they would be able to kill the 2 people in one move. Just as the 2 people were in a panic, they suddenly saw 5 golden lights attack them. They accurately passed through the bodies of the 5 devils one by one. Then, there was a loud buzzing sound, and in an instant, the yang fire was released, burning them to ashes, and the body of the spear with a coiling dragon attached to it appeared. Great Sun Dragon Sparrow Spear? Yang Bai and his wife were slightly dazed. When they looked back, they saw that Huoxian and the others had also rushed over. At this moment, there was a loud bang below. It was Sun Huaying cutting Huoxian in half at the waist again. However, when everyone saw that the calamity water did not disperse, they knew that Huoxian was not really killed yet. Zhong Muqing looked at the calamity water that was like a raging river, and he made a thunder seal. He pointed down, and a ball of green-black lightning appeared in his hand. With a tearing sound, it tore a gap of 100 feet in the calamity water. However, to the black muddy water that was a few miles long, it could not shake its foundation. Even if it was dispersed, it could still gather again. He snorted and thought, if we want to get rid of this person, it seems like we have to refine this water. Huoxian said in a deep voice, ignore his death substitution technique. With his mana alone, how can he fight against the 8 of us? Every time he comes out, we will kill him once. Let's see how much mana he has to fight against us. Everyone at the side agreed in their hearts. They had the advantage in numbers, so they had to make use of their advantage. Although Feng Haiyang's cultivation was high, he was only one person. No matter how strong his mana was, it was still limited. If they took turns to fight, they would still be able to exhaust him to death. Huoxian could see clearly that the urgent matter at hand was not to think of a way to kill this person, but to think of a way to trap him so that he could not escape with his escape technique. He raised his hand and waved. Zhong and Luo immediately understood and chose a direction to fly. Yang Bai and his wife also saw through their intentions. They took a step forward, and a strong wind rose. Instead of advancing, they retreated to the side, wanting to seal off Feng Haiyang's path of retreat. Elder Shen was only one step faster than Zhang Yan. He looked around and saw that Huoxian and the others were fighting for a position, so he did not want to steal the limelight. Instead, he intentionally or unintentionally moved closer to Zhang Yan's sword gleam that was flying in the sky. Feng Haiyang's body rose from the water of calamity. He raised his head and saw the movements of the people from Xianmen. He knew what they were planning. Even if his cultivation was higher than theirs, it would be bad if he was trapped. He did not want to sit and watch, so he clenched his fist and hammered on his chest. He shouted and spat out a 3-feet-long white light. Yang Bai had seen this divine art before. When he was about to attack, he already felt that something was wrong. He shouted, "Everyone, quickly close your eyes. Huoxian had heard from the young couple that Feng Haiyang had a divine ability that could enchant one's soul. He immediately closed his eyes to prevent his opponent from launching a sneak attack. He raised his right hand and summoned 6 great sun dragon sparrow spears into the sky. With a loud yell, he hurled them down. Luo Qingyu and Zhong Muqing did the same. To prevent any accidents, not only did they close their eyes, but they also blocked their mouths, noses, and ears with spiritual qi. At the same time, they activated their protective lights. Everyone present had just closed their eyes when they felt their bodies stiffen slightly, and then this feeling grew stronger and stronger, causing their hearts to shake. They understood that they'd fallen into the wind ocean's technique that sealed off the heavens and the earth, so all of them withdrew their magic treasures and took strict precautions, as they were deeply afraid that Qinshi would come looking for them alone. Feng Haiyang did not plan to do that. Although this divine art was powerful, it consumed a lot of mana. Even if he could kill 1 or 2 people, it would not be worth it. Instead, he would be exhausted easily. He was confident that he could kill 1 person if he was alone. However, once he was surrounded, he would lose his biggest advantage. Therefore, he could only temporarily trap everyone and think of a way to escape from the battle. He could then take control of the rhythm of the battle. He waved his sleeves and turned into a yellow smoke. He flew into the sky. Because of his fast speed, he was able to get away in an instant. However, just as he arrived in the sky, he heard the sound of thunder in his ears. Dozens of purple lightning bolts fell from above and bombarded his body. Instantly, he exploded into pieces that filled the sky. Chapter 596. Just now, Zhang Yan was still outside of the battle. When the soul-dispersing 3 dispelling qi was released, he was quite far away, so it couldn't confuse him. Thus, he acted quickly. Dozens of purple cloud godly thunder were released, instantly blasting Feng Haiyang into dust. He stepped on the top of the cloud and looked around. He saw the tribulation water below was scattering in all directions, demonic energy was rising, and a large cloud of smoke was rising. In a flash, it actually spread out for several li. The scattered water suddenly condensed into a body, turning into thousands of demons, rushing out in a chaotic manner. He saw that there were many demons, so he wanted to use the water element true light to block them. However, just as he thought about it, he felt a sense of danger. He shouted and rode on a gust of wind to avoid it. Just as he dodged to the side, he saw a gloomy white light flash past him. He didn't know what kind of treasure it was. After the white light flew away, it disappeared in the air. However, he could feel that it was just hiding and didn't leave. It was as if it could pounce at any time. Zhang Yan didn't hear the young couple talk about this item. He immediately deduced that this was a technique that Feng Haiyang had never used in front of others. Since he hid it until now, it must be very powerful. He had to be careful. He thought for a while and released the star's sword ball. He used the sword eye to check the surroundings. At this time, thousands of demons had already rushed behind him, but he didn't even turn his head. He stood there and flicked his sleeve, and a huge wave rose to the sky. It was majestic and powerful, and with a sweep of his head, all of them were drowned in it. In the churning demonic clouds, a drop of water that looked like ink flew to the west. It quietly drew a half-arc and arrived 1,000 feet behind the young couple. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a stream of water. Feng Haiyang stepped out of the water. Without saying a word, he flicked his sleeve. With a loud bang, a huge ball of dark wind was shot out, and it spiraled wider and wider. In an instant, it covered a radius of a few miles. 9 underworld's great sorrowful wind? Yang Bai and his wife were terrified. They knew how powerful this divine art was. The Nie brothers' fate was right in front of them, so how could they dare to take it head-on? The power of this divine ability was immense, but it wasn't fast when it was used. If it was in the past, they would only need to use their escape technique to escape. However, the heaven and earth lock technique was still there, so it wasn't easy to escape. He could only escape at a much slower pace than before. However, Yang Baihun only walked a few hundred feet when he felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. With a loud shout, a golden light shot out from his palm and illuminated the path in front of him. Suddenly, a strange devil appeared in the originally empty space. If one did not notice the trace of viciousness in his eyes and bumped into him, they would definitely be ambushed. Zhu Exen waved her hand as if she was playing a pipa. Hundreds of strands of sword chi that were as thin as gossamer flew out, each and every one of them sharp and piercing, forcing the demon to continuously retreat. In the end, it let out an angry roar and suddenly turned around, disappearing without a trace. Zhu Exen didn't feel surprised. Just now, the sword chi that she shot out was not a normal sword chi, but a talisman known as the Silver Swords of Flux. When attacking the enemy, it could be hidden within the sword chi and shot out at the same time. The protective treasure light was like nothing in front of it. If it wasn't a profound level artifact, it would be broken upon contact. However, right now, it could only force the demon to retreat. It didn't seem to be damaged at all, so how could she not be shocked? At the moment, escaping was more important. The two of them didn't dare to advance toward the place where the demon hid. They hurriedly moved toward where the people from the Qinsong school were. They had already realized that under the heaven and earth lock technique, if they couldn't trap Feng Haiyang in time and allowed him to escape, it would be extremely easy for them to give him a chance to attack them one by one. The husband and wife had fought with him before, so they didn't have the confidence to fight against him. Moreover, there was the great sorrow wind of the 9 underworlds chasing after them. Right now, the only way out was to retreat. As long as they could hold on for a while and wait for Huoxian and the others to come to their aid, they would be able to escape from danger. They didn't go far when a demon suddenly jumped out in front of them. The husband and wife saw that it was exactly the same as the one before, so they didn't want to be entangled by it. They turned their traveling light and turned left. A few breaths later, another demon appeared. It bared its teeth and showed its ferocious might in midair. The two of them turned pale and hastily changed their direction again. After traveling for a while, they heard a roar from the clouds. It was obvious that another demon was blocking their way. Yang Bai's eyes burned with anger, and he said, "I don't believe that all these demons are so powerful." He made a hand sign and summoned a colorful magic sword in the sky. With a shout, he controlled it to slash forward. The demon laughed strangely and fiercely welcomed the sword. With a clang, it actually knocked the magic sword to the side. The corner of Yang Bai's eyes twitched. At this moment, 5 out of the 4 directions were blocked. Helpless, they could only fly up into the sky where there were no demons. After flying for an arrow's throw, they suddenly saw the clouds in front of them disperse. A bolt of tribulation water rushed down from the sky and circled around the two of them. It instantly trapped them and separated them from the others. Yang Bai's face turned pale and he exclaimed, "Not good. We've been tricked." He immediately realized that this should be a trap laid by Feng Haiyang. Just now, he was trying to force them to jump into it. However, after thinking about it again, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Feng Haiyang was pressuring them with every move he made. Even if they knew that there was something fishy going on, they had no choice but to come here. He took a deep breath and said solemnly, "Madam, when that person shows up later, there's no need to hold back." Zhu Exen nodded silently. At this moment, they had to fight with their lives on the line. If she was Feng Haiyang, after spending so much effort to force them into this place, she wouldn't let them go. It was better to give up on the delusion and focus on fighting the enemy. She secretly channeled her Xian Qi and activated the fatal sword. Right now, this was the only Dao technique that could kill this person. Even if she had many misgivings, she couldn't care less at this moment. At this moment, there was a sudden fluctuation in the tribulation water. The 4 demons that they met just now broke out of the water and pounced at them in a ferocious manner. Both of their faces changed. It was hard enough to deal with one demon, let alone 4 at the same time. Zhu Exen gritted her teeth and took out a small copper bell from her pouch. She held it in her hand and lightly shook it, causing a clear jingle to ring out. When the 4 devils heard the sound, a bewildered look appeared in their eyes and they unexpectedly began to spin in place. However, every time the bell was shaken, the high cloud above her head dimmed a little. It was obvious that using this treasure was very taxing on one's vitality. Feng Haiyang frowned as he watched. After he made his move, he first sealed the heaven and earth, then he continuously used his supernatural power. Even though he had entered the third realm, he still felt a little weak. However, if he could absorb the flesh and blood of the two's primordial spirits, he would be able to recover quickly. Therefore, he was determined to succeed this time. He immediately appeared from the tribulation water and raised his hand as if he was going to use his supernatural power again. Yang Bai had been paying attention to the surroundings. When he saw Feng Haiyang's movement, he did not allow him to do so. This place was surrounded by the tribulation water, and if the 9 underworld's great sorrowful wind blew, where would they go to hide? His gaze turned sharp as he shouted, "Kill!" As soon as he spoke, Zhu Xen responded as well. 2 rays of light flew out from the center of the husband and wife's brows and shot out like lightning. Feng Haiyang's hand stopped in midair, and he stared at the 2 rays of sword light that were flying towards him. He knew how powerful this sword was. This sword might not be as fast as a flying sword, but it was condensed by the spirit qi. As long as it followed the spirit qi, it would be able to kill its enemies. None of the treasures he had could block it. Unless he could escape from this star rock, there was no way he could avoid it. However, this sword skill of the Yuanyang sect was very famous. He had spent a lot of effort to set up this trap, and he had already expected this move. He had already thought of a way to deal with it. Therefore, he did not move at all. In the blink of an eye, the 2 rays of sword qi arrived in front of him. His eyes flickered, and he shouted in a low voice. He activated a secret technique and waved his hand twice, cutting out 2 strands of spirit qi. At the same time, 2 sparkling jade pearls flew out from his ancestral aperture. When the pearls touched the spirit qi, they turned into 2 clones that looked exactly the same as himself and flew towards the sword qi. With 2 swishing sounds, the 2 rays of sword qi immediately cut through the 2 spirit qi. However, the sword qi that was originally shining with 7 colors suddenly dimmed down. It struggled for a few feet, and after a slight tremble, it finally dissipated. Yang Bai and his wife's bodies trembled at the same time. Blood flowed out from their 7 orifices. The cloud above their heads fluttered, as if it was about to disperse. The life-slaying sword was always effective against people with lower cultivation base, but against cultivators with higher cultivation base, it depended on luck. Feng Haiyang didn't look good either. This time, he gave up a third of his spirit qi and 2 Xian spirit crystal pearls that could resist divine powers. He took the risk of damaging his cultivation in the future to resist the sword qi head-on. However, he managed to break this Dao technique. Seeing that the 2 of them had lost the ability to fight back, he stood still at his original position. With a loud rumble, the tribulation water closed, and in an instant, the 2 of them were swept into it. With a slight twist, the 2 of them's physical body and primordial spirit were all turned into his own mana. His spirits were lifted again, and with a loud roar, he dashed out. This time, he was heading towards Elder Shin. Although it looked like he had spent a lot of effort to kill the Yang couple, his actions were actually very fast. From the beginning to the end, it only took 10 breaths. Even until now, he had not removed the heaven and earth lock technique. He was still preparing to take advantage of this opportunity to kill another person in one go. Not far away, he turned his gaze and noticed that there were 2 Taoists heading towards him. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was Luo Qingyu and Zhong Muqing. Feng Haiyang had a change of mind. With a shake of his body, there was a loud rumble, and thousands of demons surged out and flew towards the 2 of them. Then, he waved his sleeves and continued to fly forward. Not long after, he heard the sound of thunder coming from behind him. He was not bothered by it. There were many demons, and with the heaven and earth lock technique binding them, the 2 of them could not use their escape techniques. Even if the thunder technique was powerful, it would not be able to disturb him for a while. Ever since the black smoke and demonic aura appeared in front of him, Elder Shin had been vigilant of his surroundings. Suddenly, the clouds in front of him parted, and Feng Haiyang was flying towards him aggressively. He was slightly shocked. He knew himself very well, so he did not have too many complicated thoughts. Without saying anything, he immediately slapped away the golden axis talisman, and it turned into a golden light that shot up to the sky to protect himself. Feng Haiyang smiled coldly. When he attacked previously, Daoren used this talisman to hold on until Hua Xian and the others came to help, forcing him to retreat. However, after fighting with him once, he could see the weakness of this talisman. He waved his sleeves, and the tribulation water surged up and circled around Elder Shin. It actually wrapped around the golden light, and with a turn of his mana, he actually escaped with it. Chapter 597. Feng Haiyang had just swallowed the Yang couple, so his magic power was still abundant. Due to the heaven and earth shackling divine art, even if he used the water of calamity to wrap around Elder Shin and fly away, his speed was still extremely fast. Nobody could catch up to him. Although Elder Shin had used the golden talisman to protect his body, he was still able to sense that under the pressure of the tribulation water, his magic power was disappearing rapidly. If no one came to help him, he would probably be the first to be exhausted to death in less than a moment. It was not that he had no way to get out. Zhou Huang's vast cloud in one breath could not trap him to death. As long as he activated the restriction of the golden earth axis talisman, he would be able to get out. However, he would lose his ability to fight for at least 2 hours. If no one came to help him, he would die. He stroked his beard and thought for a while. Then he picked up the golden earth axis talisman, shouted and activated his mana. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang felt that the calamity water was shaking violently. There was a powerful force surging out and it was hard to suppress. Before he could react, he heard a loud bang and the calamity water collapsed. A golden ray pierced through the clouds like a pillar. Even the thick curtain of smoke and clouds in the sky was torn apart. Countless demons were crushed along the way. He was slightly taken aback and hurriedly retracted the tribulation water before summoning the devil head. When Zhang Yan heard the commotion, he turned around and saw the soaring golden light. He immediately recognized that it was Elder Shin's doing. After pondering for a moment, he formed an incantation gesture and was about to use his teleportation escape art. But at this moment, a pale white light suddenly flew out from the void and slashed at the back of his neck from 1,000 feet away. Just before this thing flew over, Zhang Yan's heart consciousness had already received a warning from the sword pellet. Thus, he didn't panic at all. His entire body suddenly turned into a stream of light and escaped. At the same time, a green firefly flew over at an incomparably fast speed. In the blink of an eye, the white light was frozen in the air. Zhang Yan stopped on the cloud and looked down. He then saw that it was a half-moon axe with a ghost head. There were blood marks on the blade, and its fangs were protruding. The sound it made was shocking. It was full of hostility. This axe was called the Dark Axe of Darkness. Not only was it extremely bloodthirsty, it even had the remnant soul of a devil sect elder sealed within it. Once it killed a person, it could absorb their blood essence and increase their power. Not only was it extremely difficult to control, it could even harm its owner. That was why Feng Haiyang had never used it before. However, ever since he entered the 3rd stage of Yuanying, he had never used it. He was confident that he could suppress this thing, so he released it. The devil axe struggled a few times, but seeing that it couldn't break free, it suddenly trembled violently, turned into a white gas, and flew away. Then it disappeared. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. His longevity-locking sun cicada was a magical treasure, so it was rare for him to fail. However, this thing could break free, so it was definitely not an ordinary treasure. However, he had the Star's Sword pill with him. As long as this thing came out, he would know in advance, so there was nothing to be afraid of. He waved his sleeves and used the minor universe shifting technique. After a few teleportations, he arrived at the place where Shen Ying and Feng Haiyang were fighting. The devil chi here had long dispersed. He looked down and immediately saw Feng Haiyang's figure. Without any hesitation, he rushed down on the cloud. When he was still a mile away, he used a spell. Instantly, a light sword ray flew up and split into 24 rays. They turned into a half-moon cold star and shot down. When Feng Haiyang saw this, He quickly used a spell to summon a devil to block the attack. At the same time, he quickly used his escape technique to retreat. After retreating for 1,000 feet, he hid in the dark clouds again. He looked around and saw that other than Zhang Yan, there were a few more rays of light coming from all directions. If he continued to fight here, he would be in danger of being surrounded again. He thought to himself, Yang Bai and Zhu Xen are already dead, Shen Yinfeng is not a concern, but the remaining people are not easy to deal with. If I continue to fight, I might not be able to gain the upper hand in a short period of time. It would be a waste of my mana. It seems like the best plan is to fight and delay. After making up his mind, he didn't stay here anymore. He leaped up into a yellow smoke and disappeared. Not long after, everyone, including Zhang Yan, suddenly felt their bodies become lighter. They realized that the trapping technique had been removed. They all became spirited and activated their escape techniques. After a few rounds, they gathered on top of a flying mountain. When they looked down, they saw that the dark clouds and devil chi were gradually dispersing, but Feng Haiyang was nowhere to be found. Sun Huaying looked around for a while, then suddenly flew away on a sword ray. After a while, she came back and shook her head. I can't find him within 5 miles of this direction. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, Feng Haiyang would not retreat just like that. I think he is hiding somewhere and waiting for a chance. Zhong and Luo both nodded in agreement. Huoxian's heart sank. He had many tricks up his sleeves. Even if he couldn't kill Feng Haiyang this time, he could still come up with another plan. However, with the death of the 2 Yuan Yang sect disciples, many of his escape routes were blocked. In this situation, Feng Haiyang actually had an advantage over them. He glanced at Elder Shen and saw that he was sitting on a rock with a pale face. Huoxian asked, How is fellow Taoist Shen? Elder Shen clasped his hands together and sighed, Thank you, Spiritual Master Hua. I was in a hurry to escape just now, so I used the precious treasure of our sect. The Golden Earth Axis spell was a precious treasure of Guangyuan, but it was not easy to use it. He had used it twice in a day, so it was hard for him to recover. Zhong Muqing frowned and said to Huoxian, Senior Marshal Brother, we can't stay here any longer. Let's go find the Junyang pot now, in case Feng Haiyang takes it away again. Huoxian nodded slightly. This was a reasonable suggestion. No matter whether Feng Haiyang had really retreated or was hiding in the dark, they had to find the Junyang pot. As long as they could get the pot, they would have the final say. Luo Qinyu asked, What should we do, fellow Taoist Shen? Elder Shen would not be able to fight for a period of time. In fact, this was more troublesome than killing him. If they left him alone, Feng Haiyang would only need to send a demon to kill him. However, if they were to take care of him, they would need to split their manpower, which was not appropriate. Zhong Muqing said lightly, I have an idea, but I don't know if fellow Taoist Shen is willing to do it. Elder Shen understood what he meant. He first looked at Zhang Yan, and when he saw the latter nodding, he stood up shakily and clasped his hands together. My mana is not good enough, so I don't want to be a burden to all of you. I'm willing to withdraw from the sword battle. Huoxian saw that Elder Shen knew when to advance and retreat, so he nodded. He pondered for a while and took out a jade talisman from his sleeve pocket. He handed it to Elder Shen and said in a friendly manner, Fellow Taoist Shen, if there's anything in Guangyuan in the future, you can come to Qinsong with this talisman to look for me. Elder Shen straightened his robe, took a few steps forward, and received it respectfully. He clasped his hands together and said, Thank you, Spiritual Master Hua. He took out a few talisman papers from his sleeve pocket and gave them to everyone. He said, This is my Guangyuan talisman edict. It might be useful to all of you, so please accept it. Although Huoxian and the others accepted it, it was obvious that they were just being polite and did not really care about the talisman papers. Elder Shen finally walked in front of Zhang Yan and offered a stack of talisman papers with both hands. He said, Spiritual Master Zhang, I have nothing to thank you for taking care of me. I can only offer these talismans in hopes that they can help fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan reached out to take the talisman, but his heart was slightly moved. He took it calmly and said, Take care, fellow Taoist Shen. When I return from the sword battle, I'll pay you a visit. Elder Shen took a step back and bowed. He said, "Fellow Taoist, I'll take my leave." He took out the talisman paper and chanted a spell. After a while, he felt his body become empty. No matter how much transcendence energy a cultivator had in their body, the talisman paper would absorb it all in one go. However, the stronger the transcendence energy, the faster it could be used. After about 20 breaths, a dazzling light spread out like a rising cloud and covered Elder Shen. The spiritual energy was suddenly pushed away, and everyone could not help but take a few steps back. They saw a golden light shoot up from the ground and fly away from the star stone. Huoxian watched the light fly away, then he turned around to face the others. He said, "Everyone, there are only 5 of us left now. Honestly speaking, it's not a good idea to surround and kill Feng Haiyang." He was the top disciple of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong School. This time, he came to the sword battle to ensure that every disciple returned to the school. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain himself when he returned. If they insisted on surrounding and killing Feng Haiyang, even if they could kill him, it would not be worth it if some of them died. Zhong Muqing was aware of his concerns, so he asked, "What do you have in mind, Senior Hua?" Huoxian's gaze moved back and forth between Zhang Yan and Sun Huang. He said, "Let's move together later and pretend to search for the Junyang pot. I expect Feng Haiyang will definitely come to stop us. At that time, my 2 junior brothers and I will try to hold him back. Then fellow Taoist Sun and junior brother Zhang will search for the Junyang pot. With your sword escape technique, you can leave first. I believe Feng Haiyang will not be able to catch up to you." Since they could not kill Feng Haiyang, they could only settle for the next best thing. Their goal had changed, so their strategy had to change accordingly. The 5 of them moved together. Although they were not afraid of Feng Haiyang, Sun Huang and Zhang Yan could not use their sword escape technique. The only way to break the stalemate was to use their strengths to the fullest. Huoxian cupped his hands at Sun Huang and said politely, "What do you think, fellow Taoist Sun?" Sun Huang lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, "Right now, we are only defending against a strong enemy. Since fellow Taoist Hua has a plan, we will follow your plan. I have no objections." Luo Qingyu thought about it carefully and nodded. Even if the 3 of them could not defeat Feng Haiyang, it would not be difficult for them to defend against him. Moreover, Zhang Yan and Sun Huang would be able to use their strengths to their fullest. This was indeed the most appropriate choice. Zhong Muqing looked at the crowd and stood up. He said, "I think this is not a good idea." Huoxian smiled. "Junior brother Zhong, if you have any objections, you can tell me." Zhong Muqing said seriously, "Senior brother Hua's idea is not bad. However, I think that fellow Taoist Sun and junior brother Zhang should hold Feng Haiyang back while the 3 of us search for the Junyang pot." Huoxian pondered for a while and glanced at Luo Qingyu. The latter understood and asked with a smile, "Senior brother, may I ask what the reason is?" Zhong Muqing pointed at Zhang Yan and said in a deep voice, "Have you ever thought about it? Junior brother Zhang has a lot of talismans with him. If I were Feng Haiyang, I would definitely target him first. If he went to look for the Junyang pot, I would risk my life to stop him. However, if it was the other way around, the 3 of us would have a higher chance of winning. P.S. I strongly recommend Jiang Shan Beyond the Fog's new book, Solitary Way. Jiang Shan is a veteran xianxia author. His books have always been good, and they are all complete. I recommend everyone to read them." Chapter 598. Huoxian remained silent. What Zhong Muqing said was not completely unreasonable. After all, no one knew what Feng Haiyang was thinking. However, now that Zhang Yan was here in the name of the Yaoyin clan, the rules of Qinsong School could not restrict him. If he was unwilling, Huoxian could not force him. No matter what, he still had to agree to it. After thinking about it, he turned around and asked, "Junior brother Zhang, what do you think?" Zhang Yan had a few thoughts in his mind. If Feng Haiyang really had his eyes on him, no matter what he did, the result would be the same. However, if Feng Haiyang valued the Junyang pot more, he would most likely go after the person who was looking for it. After thinking about it, he smiled and waved his sleeves to give out the bright moon mirror. He said, I can lend this mirror to Senior Brother Hua. It will be easier to find the talisman order. Hua Xian stretched out his hand and took the mirror. He could tell what Zhang Xian's choice was from his words, so he nodded at him and said, Junior Brother Zhang, this matter concerns the outcome of the sword battle. There's no time to argue right now, so I won't bother with pleasantries. After that, he held the mirror in his hand and shone it at an area. After a long time, he checked the situation within a few hundred miles. Zhong Muqing took half a step forward and asked with concern, Senior Brother, how is it? Hua Xian shook his head and said, We need to look elsewhere. Luo Qingyu smiled and said, The Junyang pot will wander around. If it was so easy to find, Feng Haiyang would not have to fight with us here. Zhong Muqing pondered and said, Feng Haiyang came from the west. He must have searched that area. Let's go in the opposite direction and head to the east first. Everyone agreed with this statement. After the discussion was settled, they all activated their escape techniques and flew into the sky. The 5 of them did not gather together. Instead, Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying went together. The 3 of them from Qinsong School went their separate ways. Just now, everyone had found out that Feng Haiyang had just entered the 3rd degree. After all, Feng Haiyang had just entered the 3rd stage. Although the power of the Forbidden Lock technique was not weak, it could only cover a radius of 7 to 8 miles. It would be impossible for it to improve any further in a short period of time. That was why they agreed to be 10 miles apart from each other. As a result, it was unable to trap everyone inside in one go. Feng Haiyang was hiding several kilometers away. He had been paying attention to the movements of the disciples of the Divine Profound Sect. When he saw that they had used their treasured mirror and that they were still flying towards the east, he immediately became more vigilant. The devil had not explored that area yet, so the Junyang pot might be there. He did not dare to let the people from the Celestial Sect go there. He immediately activated the Yellow Springs escape art and turned into yellow smoke as he chased after them. Not long after, he circled to the front from the side. After standing still, he made a hand seal and turned into a tumbling water that was more than 30 miles long. It blocked the way. At the same time, there were more than 1,000 devils coming from both sides. The disciples of the Celestial Sect had been waiting for Feng Haiyang to come out. When they saw him, they were all excited. Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying did not stop. Instead, they rushed forward. The 3 of them from Qinsong School suddenly turned to the south and activated the thunder technique at the same time. Among them, Zhong Muqing's Shui-Weaking thunder technique was the most powerful. Immediately, the devils exploded one by one. Sun Huaying arrived in front of the water and stopped. She shouted coldly and rode a sword light. Like a shooting star, she cut through the air. Although Feng Haiyang was not afraid, if he took the sword head-on, even if he could come out of the water, he would still miss the opportunity. Therefore, although he was unwilling, he could only dodge first. He was slower by a beat. Zhang Yan made a hand seal and shook the sword pellet away. It turned into 36 swords and flew in all directions. They did not want to kill this person, but to block his path. Hua Xian and the others had prepared for that attack for a long time. Therefore, it was very powerful. In a blink of an eye, it wiped out more than 1,000 devils. There were no more obstacles in front of them. Without hesitation, the 3 of them flew away. According to their previous plan, they needed to take advantage of the time when Sun and Zhang were temporarily entangled with Feng Haiyang and escape before he could react. Feng Haiyang was surprised and wanted to stop them. However, Sun Huaying's sword light intertwined and pinned him to the spot. Previously, Hua Xian and the others did not fight with Feng Haiyang directly. They only listened to Yang Bai and his wife's explanation. The arrangement of the siege was very careless and there were many flaws. However, this time, because they had already fought with him once, they had a good understanding of his abilities. Therefore, they made a thorough arrangement and successfully held him in place. In a short while, the 3 people from Qinsong School were already far away. When Feng Haiyang saw this, how could he not see through the plans of the people from the Celestial Sect? His eyes flickered and a thought appeared in his mind. Hua Xian and the others can't compete with me. Why don't I try to kill Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying first? However, when he thought about it, he felt that it was inappropriate. His goal was to prevent the people from the celestial sect from obtaining any Junyang qi. How could it be so easy to kill Sun and Zhang Yan? If he stayed here for too long, who knew if the Junyang pot would be taken away by the people from the celestial sect? Just now, he could clearly see that the treasure mirror was in Huoxian's hands. Zhong Muqing had previously thought that Zhang Yan would be targeted because he had several decrees on him, but Feng Haiyang didn't think so. The reason was that in his opinion, Zhang Yan was still a disciple of Qinsong school. Even though he was strong, his ranking was still lower than Hua and Zhong. Judging from the actions of the people in front of him, the decrees were most likely given to Huoxian. That way, they could take away most of the Junyang qi in one go. Feng Haiyang's thoughts turned very fast. He immediately decided not to get entangled with the two people. At this moment he felt a chill on his body again. As his eyes turned, he saw another sword light coming. The two of them hooked their fingers, and a devil took the initiative to hit the flying sword. At the same time, he jumped into the conveyance light, wanting to chase after Huoxian and the others. Sun Huaying's eyes were cold. With a point of her finger, she used the so close, yet worlds apart technique. When the sword light was about to touch the devil, it suddenly disappeared. When it reappeared, it was already behind Feng Haiyang. With the sound of the sword, the white light was like lightning, and it cut the devil into two. The reason why the devil could block the sword light before was because he didn't know that the flying sword could not cut it. Now that they met again, he wouldn't make the same mistake again. Instead, Feng Haiyang didn't have time to react, and he was cut. Seeing that his sword was successful, the high cloud above Zhang Yan's head shook, and in an instant, it became 1,000 feet wide. After a while, dozens of purple thunderbolts struck down, and they took the opportunity to break the tribulation water in the middle, making it difficult for them to gather again. At this moment, one of the water droplets swayed, and in an instant, it flew into the distance. With a rumble, another turbid wave surged out, and a yellow smoke flew up. When it was still in the air, it spun around, and Feng Haiyang appeared again. His face was cold, and he raised his hand to grab in the direction. After a while, the two of them suddenly felt an invisible pressure coming from all directions, and it pressed down on them with all its might. Their bodies couldn't help but stiffen. Zhang Yan instantly felt that Feng Haiyang's heaven and earth seal technique this time was much more powerful than the last time. Not only did its power increase greatly, but it was also faster to use it. It was obvious that after using this technique repeatedly, he was getting more familiar with it. He raised his head and saw that after Feng Haiyang used this technique, he didn't bother about them anymore. Instead, he flew towards the south and chased after them. Hence, he summoned the star's sword pill in his heart. In the ancient times of the sky, there were 36 sword lights that were like golden rainbows and silver stars, and they flew towards them from all directions. Sun Huaying could tell that this was a good time to attack, so she also used her technique to control her sword. The sword pill suddenly turned into a stream of light, and it chased after Feng Haiyang from afar. Feng Haiyang was attacked from all directions, and he was blocked from all directions. He didn't even have a place to dodge. His body was once again cut into pieces, and he fell into the disastrous water. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. There was no technique that could not be broken in this world. Ever since he started fighting with Feng Haiyang, he had been secretly thinking about how to break this death substitution technique of his. After a few observations, he had a vague idea of how to break it, but he couldn't confirm it yet. He would have to try again to find out. After a few breaths, the sound of surging waves came from 10,000 feet away. Feng Haiyang emerged from the disastrous water again, and the coldness in his eyes intensified. If he didn't trap or kill the two of them, it would be impossible for him to escape. He took a slight breath, and suddenly, a long cry came from his throat. All of a sudden, the strong wind came whistling, and he raised his wrist as if he was going to press down. The two of them instantly felt a shocking strong wind coming at them, and they quickly used their protective treasured light. Zhang Yan even took out the Qingkuan leaf and carefully protected himself. This time, Feng Haiyang used all of his strength to control the strong wind, and he faced the two of them head-on. This technique was purely used to attack the opponent with mana. Although the possibility of harming the opponent was next to nothing, it could make the two of them unable to use any techniques. Compared to him, Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying's mana was much weaker. Faced with this most brutal technique, they didn't have a suitable way to break it. They could only defend carefully. However, this technique couldn't last long, and they believed that he would have to stop before long. After Feng Haiyang managed to suppress the two of them, he muttered something and waved his sleeve. Suddenly an item flew out, and it looked like a painting. After it flew into the air, it grew bigger and bigger with the wind, and it looked like it was going to expand to the ends of the world. Zhang Yan immediately noticed that something was wrong, and he took advantage of the fact that Feng Haiyang's strong wind was slightly weaker to forcefully use the minor universe shifting escape technique. This technique was also greatly restricted in the confinement, but with the support of a strong foundation, he didn't have to worry about his mana running out. He continuously used it more than 10 times, and just as he was about to reach the area of confinement, he felt his eardrums vibrate and the sky above him darkened. He had already sunk into darkness. After a few more breaths, he suddenly saw light, and countless mountains appeared in front of him. Among the mountains, many winding paths appeared. Feng Haiyang looked down, and when he saw that everything within a 10-mile radius was covered by this painting, he calmed down. This treasure was called the illusionary painting of 10,000 mountains, and it was given to him by a good friend in his sect. It was said that it was also obtained from a disciple of Butian Pavilion. There were more than 100 paths in the painting, and only 9 of them could be used to get out. If one took the wrong path, he would have to start all over again. Because it couldn't hurt people, it could only trap them, and it consumed a lot of mana to use, Feng Haiyang had always regarded it as useless. However, in order to get rid of the two of them, he didn't hesitate to use this treasure with a lot of mana. He coldly snorted and thought, even if the two of them were lucky and walked the right path, it would take at least 15 minutes to get out of the painting. The most important thing now is to find Huoxian and the others, so that the Junyang pot won't be taken away. He leaped up, turned into a yellow smoke, and rushed toward the south. Chapter 599. Feng Haiyang stood on top of the cloud with the sun-bathing mirror in his hand. He shook it towards the south and a ray of light shot out. Not long after, just as the mirror light was about to find something, a bright light suddenly flashed, and the mirror turned into a vast expanse of white. He sneered. He only needed to find where Huoxian and the other two were. As for the specific situation, it was the same whether he knew or not. It was not like there would be more people appearing out of nowhere. He put away the mirror and soared into the sky. Xingshi South Road. Huoxian kept the moon-bathing mirror and said, "Junior brothers, I think Feng Haiyang will catch up soon." Zhong Muqing frowned. It seems like he doesn't want Xianmen to get the Junyang pot. He did not believe that Feng Haiyang had already killed Sun and Zhang Huaying since he caught up so quickly. It could only be said that Feng Haiyang valued Sun Hu and the others more. As for Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying not being able to hold Feng Haiyang back longer, nobody complained. Everyone knew that Feng Haiyang had the heaven and earth locking technique and his mana was high. If he wanted to leave, nobody would be able to stop him. Luo Qingyu said, "Senior brother Hua, should we wait for junior brother Zhang and Jinren Sun to catch up and find a chance to escape?" Huoxian immediately rejected the suggestion. He said, "We were able to make a move first because we caught him off guard. Feng Haiyang is someone who has suffered once. This time he will definitely be more vigilant. This will not work." He pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "Presently, we've already searched the southern path, yet we've found nothing, so we can only search the eastern and northern paths. I'll stay behind. Junior brother Luo, junior brother Zhong, both of you go ahead with the mirrors." Luo Qingyu was shocked and quickly tried to dissuade him. "Senior brother, why? We can't." Feng Haiyang was a Yuanying level 3 cultivator. Even if the three of them worked together, they could only barely protect themselves. If Huoxian fought him alone, the outcome was obvious. Huoxian's attitude was firm. He said, "If I stay behind alone, Feng Haiyang will not miss this opportunity. I don't think Feng Haiyang will miss such a good opportunity, so I can keep him occupied for a while. Junior brothers, don't worry. I value my life a lot. I won't die in vain. With the lofty cloud tower to protect me, I won't get hurt. If worst comes to worst, I'll just leave this world. Luo Qingyu said seriously, I can do it for you. Why do you need to do it yourself? However, Huoxian shook his head. If Luo Qingyu had been the one to do it, Feng Haiyang might not have stopped. If it was Huoxian himself, the bait would have been big enough. Zhong Muqing, who had been silent earlier, said slowly, let me do it. Senior brother Hua, we don't know if we can find the Junyang pot in front of us. We still need you to take charge of this place. I'll leave this matter to you. Huoxian frowned and said, Junior brother. Zhong Muqing interrupted him and said, I know what senior martial brother Hua is worried about. I have a plan. Even though it's risky, we might be able to deceive this person. His lips moved and he transmitted his voice to say something. After Huoxian heard it, his eyes gradually lit up and he said, Junior martial brother Zhong has a good plan. It's a little risky, but it's considered thoughtful. Zhong Muqing saw that Luo Qingyu still wanted to say something, so he shook his head and said, Junior martial brother Zhong, we don't have much time. It's not a good time to argue. I have the supernatural power of 2 images heart. If Feng Haiyang is willing to fight with me, we can at least buy some time. Time was pressing, and there was no time to think carefully. Huoxian thought for a while and made a decision. He said, all right, let's do as junior martial brother Zhong said. As soon as he spoke, Luo Qingyu did not say anything else. The two of them cupped their hands at Zhong Muqing and flew away from the south to the east. Zhong Muqing turned around and stood in midair, waiting quietly. In less than a moment he saw a yellow smoke coming from afar. He raised his voice and said, Sage Feng, I'm here to stop you. If you don't dare to fight, feel free to leave. Feng Haiyang was surprised at first, then he laughed and said, Fellow Taoist Zhong, you don't have to provoke me. I know what you want. To be honest, if the 3 of you are together, I can't do anything to you. But if you're alone, I won't let you go. None of the people he killed earlier were from the 3 major sects, so he did not think much of them. However, Zhong Muqing was ranked second among the top 10 disciples of Qinsong, second only to Huoxian. He shook his shoulder and thousands of demons were sent out. This was to prevent Huoxian from ordering Zhong Muqing to come out while he hid nearby to trick Zhong Muqing. In fact, it was the most convenient to use the mirror to investigate. However, Zhong Muqing was in front of him, so he did not have a chance to take a closer look. Zhong Muqing stood there and did not make a move. Since Feng Haiyang did not move, he was happy to do so. He only hoped that he could drag this on for as long as possible. Feng Haiyang looked around for a while and made sure that there was no one else within 10 miles. Without further delay, he sent the demons further away. He then shouted and opened up the tribulation water. It broke through the huge waves and rushed forward. His escape technique, magic power, and divine power were all higher than his opponents. Thus, he did not use any fancy tricks and used the most direct method to attack his opponent. Zhong Muqing's expression changed slightly. This was the situation that he did not want to see the most. However, he had no way to retreat at this moment. He could only face it head-on. He shouted in a low voice, and the strong cloud above his head surged. Whirling strong wind was produced, and it was like a hurricane that went against the current. It rumbled and went straight up to resist the tribulation water. He cultivated the water and wood technique, so he could be considered to have a long-lasting effect. However, the difference in magic power between him and Feng Haiyang was too big. In just 20 breaths, he gradually felt that he could not endure this kind of collision. Feng Haiyang's expression was calm. This kind of real battle was the most advantageous to him. According to his estimation, he would be able to exhaust this person to death in at most 5 minutes. After a while, cold sweat appeared on Zhong Muqing's forehead. He was panting as if he was seriously ill. His whole body was trembling, and even the protective light on his body was flickering. It was obvious that he had consumed too much of his magic power and was at the end of his rope. A cold light appeared in Feng Haiyang's eyes. He suddenly felt that his chance had come. He shook his sleeve and a pale white light flew out. Although Zhong Muqing was exhausted, he did not have the power to resist. He made a hand seal, and a jade umbrella that emitted a gentle light flew down from the strong cloud. It was like a canopy that covered the sky. This treasure was given to him by Qin Yu. It was used by her in the past, so it was not an ordinary treasure. The white light circled around it a few times, but it was unable to break through. When Feng Haiyang saw this, he pointed his finger downwards. 3 faint shadows of demons appeared in the void and tried to bite Zhong Muqing's body. Zhong Muqing's expression changed. He immediately sensed the peculiarity of these devils. In his current state, he most likely wouldn't be able to resist them. He snorted and a speck of light flew out from his sleeve. In the blink of an eye, it actually transformed into a huge palace. Countless restrictions flickered incessantly. When the tribulation water slammed into it, it was as if it was slamming into a reef, causing it to shatter. Great Wei's Cloud Tower? Feng Haiyang's eyes narrowed. He had planned to kill this person just now, but he did not expect to have this item. He sneered and said, "Even if you have this item to protect you, you will only be struggling at death's door." The name of Great Wei's Yunke was well known to him as well. Although this item was extremely strong in defense, it consumed a lot of mana. With Zhong Muqing's ability, he would not be able to maintain it for long. When the time came, he would still be dead. Hence, he took out the incantation and added some more force. The tribulation waters surged up layer by layer. Zhong Muqing sat in the cloud tower and resisted the attacks of the calamity water. After 100 breaths, his face gradually turned pale. He sat firmly and took out the talisman from his sleeve. He thought to himself, "Senior Hua, I can only hold on until this point. I will have to leave first." He chanted the incantation and opened the talisman. In an instant, the remaining magic power in his body was sucked dry, and his body went limp. Without the support of magic power, Great Wei's Cloud Tower immediately turned into a light and went back into his sleeve. The calamity water that surrounded the area was squeezing up. At this moment, it was as if there was no dam. With a rumble, the huge waves crashed into the inner circle. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed in Zhong Muqing's eyes. He looked like he was on the verge of death, but he was suddenly full of energy. He sat up and shouted. The high cloud above his head shook, and his magic power surged. His gang qi overflowed and blocked the calamity water that was rushing toward him. Feng Haiyang was stunned. He looked at the talisman hanging in front of him and frowned. He thought to himself, could this be the 2 images heart transformation technique? It's really magical. The 2 images heart transformation technique divided the spirit into 2, the inner and outer spirits. When fighting with others, if the body was severely injured or the magic power was depleted, the outer spirit could be hidden in the heart and the inner spirit could be drawn out to control the body. After the exchange, not only would the magic power be restored, the injuries could be healed as well. It was as if the body had 2 lives. However, the person who cultivated this technique had to cultivate the 2 complementary techniques in Qinsong school. Among the top 10 disciples, Zhong Muqing was the only one who was proficient in this technique. Zhong Muqing was in his peak condition and he had the protection of a rare treasure. With all his strength and defense, Feng Haiyang could not do anything to him. After another 10 breaths, the talisman moved and exploded into a ball of golden light. It circled around him, broke through the calamity water, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. In the Myriad Mountains illusory painting, Zhang Yan tried to observe it once and understood some of its profoundness. He could not fly in the painting, and he could not use treasures to explore the path ahead. Otherwise, it would disturb the spiritual opportunity and make it more complicated. Apart from that, there were no other abnormalities. Feng Haiyang was probably using it to delay the 2 of them. When he first entered the painting, he vaguely saw Sun Huaying falling in with him. However, she disappeared later on. It was probably because she was separated by the mountain's illusion. However, with this Shaoqing disciple's ability, it should be fine. He smiled and stepped into the painting. There was actually no meridian to be found on the path in the painting. It depended on each person's luck. Fortunately, his luck was not bad. He walked out of the painting in less than a minute and shouted. He turned into a ray of light and charged into the sky. He looked around and saw that Sun Huaying had not come out yet, so he stood on the spot and waited. However, after waiting for a while, she did not come out. Zhang Yan looked at the sky and thought, I wonder when Jinren Sun will come out. I can't wait anymore. Why don't I go first? He took out a letter and used his spiritual opportunity to write a few words. Then he left it on the spot and flew towards the south on a sword light. P.S. Friendly recommendation, Rebirth as a Mountain. Recently, there were many books about rebirth. This book was about Buzhou Mountain. Chapter 600. Zhang Yan flew on his flying sword, and not long after he arrived at the South Starstone Road. This place was densely covered with flying peaks, and there was one every several hundred zhang. His flying light flew here and there, and not long after, an open area appeared in front of him. As far as the eye could see, it was full of floating rubble, broken branches, and broken leaves, and there were still traces of battle. At this moment, he looked around and suddenly saw a demon hiding behind a gravel, looking around sneakily. He smiled and casually shot out a purple cloud heavenly thunder, which extinguished the demon instantly. He looked around and saw that there was nothing unusual. Then, he flicked his sleeve and a sword rainbow appeared and continued to move forward. After Feng Haiyang forced Zhong Muqing to retreat, he chased after Huoxian and Luo Qingyu. With the help of the mirror, he could always keep up with them. Initially, the two of them used the mirror to hide themselves. However, they seemed to know that it was useless, so they stopped hiding and just flew on the light. Unknowingly, the three of them arrived at the East Star Stone Road and the distance between them was getting closer. As Feng Haiyang was flying, he suddenly felt something. He looked around and his eyelids twitched. He thought to himself, how did Zhang Yan escape from the painting of Thousand Mountains so quickly? Sun Huaying will probably catch up soon. I need to catch up with Huoxian quickly, otherwise, I will be entangled by the two of them again. While he was distracted, the scenery around him changed a little. He didn't notice it at first, but after walking for a while, he clearly felt as if he had broken into another world, and there was an endless amount of willow-green air pressing on his body. He immediately knew that something was wrong. He shouted, and a strong wind swirled around him, stirring up a whistling gale. The Yin Thunder Devil Chi flew out continuously, blasting away the green gas around him. He shook his body, and without delay, turned into a wisp of yellow smoke and fled. The surrounding spiritual vigor suddenly surged and there was an endless amount of green cloud wind that was pressing down on him, chasing after him. It was originally a gentle ball of green cloud wind that was light and clear, but when it reached the side of his body, it exploded. It kept cutting away the tribulation water that was surrounding him. He ignored it and focused on escaping. After a while, Feng Haiyang felt that his body was light. He knew that he had escaped. He flicked his sleeves and flew to the sky. He turned around to take a look. The green light in the formation dispersed like a curtain, and Luo Qingyu appeared from within. He stood on a peak. He cupped his hands and said, Sage Feng, I've been waiting here for a long time. If you want to chase after senior brother Hua, you'll have to go through me first. Feng Haiyang took a few glances at the center of the formation. He saw that there were 72 formation mountains that were shaking with wind and thunder. They were trembling non-stop as if they were accumulating great power. He thought to himself, this formation is really extraordinary. Even if I'm able to break through it, I'll surely have to expend a great deal of effort, and it's even possible for me to drag it out for a few hours. Moreover, this person isn't afraid of fighting me one-on-one. I presume he's similar to Zhong Muqing and possesses the Qinsong School's lofty cloud tower. Fighting him is rather unwise. He sneered and didn't say a word. The tribulation water in front of him surged and released thousands of devils. He commanded them to surge downward. At the same time, his body shook and he turned into a wisp of yellow smoke that shot up into the sky. Luo Qingyu raised his eyebrows and raised his hand. There was wind and thunder at the 72 peaks beneath his feet. The moment the devils entered the peaks, they were blasted into pieces. When he turned to look at Feng Haiyang again, he saw that Feng Haiyang had already flown far away. He couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. After he had refined the Qingping mist formation repeatedly, it was much stronger than it was during the battle with Zhang Yan. Moreover, this formation was very difficult to detect when it was used in the mountains where there were many plants. The cultivator would unknowingly fall into its trap. He initially wanted to lure Feng Haiyang into the depths of the mountain and use the Qingji wind and thunder ritual to torture him for a while. Unfortunately, Feng Haiyang's mana was very high and he was very vigilant. Once he realized that something was wrong, he forcefully retreated and returned without any success. If it was an ordinary Yuanian cultivator, he would have already succeeded. But it doesn't matter. Since he's gone, I'll act according to plan. Luo Qingyu chuckled. With a tap of his foot, a green cloud lifted his body up into the air. He checked his bearings and decided not to head toward the wind-chasing ocean. Instead, he rode on a gust of wind and headed toward the middle road. After flying for a while, he saw a familiar conveyance light flying towards him. He couldn't help but feel happy and shouted, "Is that junior brother Zhang?" When Zhang Yan saw Luo Qingyu, he was slightly stunned. When he got closer, he stopped the conveyance light and raised his hand to salute. He asked in surprise, "Why is senior brother Luo here? Where are senior brother Hua and senior brother Zhong?" Luo Qingyu stopped the cloud light and returned the salute. He smiled and said, "I'm here on senior brother Hua's order to look for junior brother Zhang." He looked behind Zhang Yan and asked, "Where is Zhenren Sun?" Zhang Yan told him about the situation just now and then said, "Although the map can trap people, it won't take long for fellow Taoist Sun to come out." Luo Qingyu smiled mysteriously and said, "It's better that Sun Huaying is not here." He reached into his sleeves and took out an item. He presented it with both hands and said, "Junior brother Zhang, this item is returned to its owner." Zhang Yan took a look and realized that it was the moon mirror. His eyes flashed and he shook his sleeves to keep the mirror into his pouch. He asked, "Why is this treasure with you?" Luo Qingyu smiled and said, "This is senior brother Zhong's plan. He once said that since Feng Haiyang came after us, we should change our plan. Junior brother Zhong will go and look for the pot. Feng Haiyang will be in a hurry and will not notice it. We can deceive him." Zhong Muqing thought that Feng Haiyang came after them because they had the mirror with them. He was afraid that they would get the Junyang pot before them. If that was the case, they might as well adjust their strategy. They would find a chance to return the mirror to Zhang Yan secretly and ask him to look for the pot. Then they would deal with Feng Haiyang. However, it was not easy to do so. Zhong Muqing was very daring. He suggested that he should go up and stop Feng Haiyang first, so as to create an illusion that he was trying his best to delay Feng Haiyang. In this way, when Luo Qingyu went up to stop Feng Haiyang would most likely ignore him. After Feng Haiyang left, Luo Qingyu would look for Zhang Yan and return the mirror. This was a risky move from the beginning to the end. Feng Haiyang would fail if he felt something was wrong. However, it was worth a try under such a disadvantageous situation. Luo Qingyu pointed at his feet and said, "My two senior brothers and I have already scouted the south road, but we did not find any trace of the treasured pot. Feng Haiyang is chasing after senior brother Hua in the east, so you can only go north. It would be best if you can find the treasured pot, but if you can't, junior brother, please come back to meet us." Zhang Yan nodded. Since they had come this far, there was at least some hope of success. However, he still had to be careful in case Feng Haiyang realized something was wrong and turned around to chase after him. He thought for a while and smiled. "I want to ask for something from you, senior brother." Luo Qingyu said casually, "What do you want? Just tell me." Zhang Yan asked, "I wonder if you have the fake pot that we got from Lu Muqiu with you?" Luo Qingyu was stunned and laughed. "I thought it was something important. Junior brother, you can have it." He reached into his sleeve and searched for a while. He took out the fake pot and passed it to Chu Li. Zhang Yan kept it. Since time was running out, he did not say anything else. After he bid farewell to Luo Qingyu, he turned into a conveyance light and flew towards the north with all his might. After Luo Qingyu saw him off, he flew up into the sky and turned into a stream of light. He flew into the sky and went to help Wu Xian. Zhang Yan became one with his sword and flew towards the north at lightning speed. When he reached the middle road, he stopped and landed on a flying peak. He took out the fake pot and a talisman. He activated his mana and turned it into a stream of clear spiritual qi and went into the mouth of the pot. He threw the pot on the ground and chanted a few incantations. He pointed at it and the pot seemed to have a mind of its own. It immediately jumped up and jumped back and forth on the rocks. Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeve. A strong wind blew and sent the pot to the south. This was to confuse Feng Haiyang. If Feng Haiyang found out about it, he would come to check it himself if he could not tell if it was real or fake. This would buy him a lot of time. After he was done, he rode on his sword again. This time, he did not stop at all. In less than 45 minutes, he arrived at the north side of the Star Stone Road. The Star Stone was not perfectly round. The east and west sides were very big, and the north and south sides were relatively small. This place was thousands of miles away from the east side. Feng Haiyang would not be able to see this place. Even if he knew he was here, he would not be able to rush over. Zhang Yan chose a flying peak and landed. He picked up the bright moon mirror and shone it in front of him. After a while, he changed to another location. He looked back and forth for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. He looked through the area of hundreds of miles, but he found nothing. However, he was not in a hurry. The pot had a mind of its own and did not want to be caught. Feng Haiyang took it last time, so this time it must be hiding. He had to search carefully. If he could not find it, he would think of a way to go to the east side. He held the mirror in his hand and flew forward. After another hundreds of miles, he found that he had reached the end of the north side of the Star Stone Road. He looked up and saw a huge cliff. The top and bottom were gradually covered by fog and clouds. He could not see the end. There were countless old vines and branches climbing on the wall. Inside, there was a faint crystal light, like salt and snow. These were the outer heavens elite that gathered in the cracks of the rock. There were also a few high cliffs with waterfalls rushing down, making loud noises. He looked at it for a moment and picked up the treasure mirror. He activated his mana and a ray of mirror light shot forward. This light was extremely strange. As long as it wasn't a natural concealment object, it could illuminate the inside and outside of the ravine in the belly of the mountain. After illuminating the mirror for half a day, he suddenly saw something in the mirror that looked like the root of a tree seemed to be startled. Seeing the mirror light coming over, it swayed a little, as if it was dissatisfied. It bounced a few times on the mountain rock, and suddenly dropped down into the mountain stream. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. He waved his sleeves and leaped up. He rushed more than 100 miles and arrived at the boundary. He circled in the sky and slowly floated down. He landed on a strange phosphorescent stone and took out the talisman order. He held it between two fingers and shook it gently. After a while, a ray of clear light floated out. When it came close, he grabbed it and brought it to his eyes. He wiped the mud on the pot and looked at it carefully. He first let out a sigh, then a long and clear laugh came from the cliff. Chapter 601. Zhang Yan looked at the Junyang pot in his hand. His eyes were deep. Since the pot was in his hand, he could take away the essence and return to the Star Stone. However, this place was unique and similar to the Spirit Cave. If he could cultivate here for 3 years, his cultivation would improve greatly. This was a great opportunity. How could he give it up so easily? As he thought of this, he waved his sleeves and 5 golden talismans flew out and floated in the sky. He raised his finger and slightly activated his mana. The talismans trembled and were guided by the Qi dynamic. 5 streams of Junyang essence Qi were drawn out from the pot. The Qi was clear and bright. Just by looking at it, he felt as if he had drunk a cup of nectar. His whole body felt comfortable. After taking a few deep breaths, he calmed his mind and waved his hand to absorb the Qi. He took out 5 more snow jade porcelain bottles and put them into the bottles. After that, he thought to himself, I wonder if senior martial brother Hua can block Feng Haiyang? After thinking about it carefully, he took out a yellow talisman from his sleeve. It was a gift from Elder Shin. It could track a cultivator's morale. If Huaxian and the others were still in the Star Stone, he could use it to find them. With a pinch of his finger, the talisman trembled, and with a flash of light, it flew towards the east. Zhang Yan was refreshed. He shouted and used his sword ray to chase after the talisman. The flying talisman was much faster than a cultivator's flying escape. Even the sword escape could not catch up. After a while, the talisman flew out of his sight. However, he had already identified the direction. He only needed to go in that direction. After flying for a few thousand miles, he suddenly looked up and saw the flying talisman was surrounded by a cloud of green chi that was more than 10 miles wide. Green Peace Mist Formation? Zhang Yan recognized the origin of the green cloud. If he was right, it should be Luo Qingyu who trapped Feng Haiyang in the formation map and they were fighting. Suddenly, he felt something and looked towards the south. He saw a tall and lonely Taoist standing on the peak, his body as straight as a pen. With a thought, Zhang Xian rode the wind and got closer. He floated down and cupped his hands. Taoist Sun, you have arrived. Sun Huaying raised his hand to return the greeting. He did not ask where Zhang Yan had gone or why he had only arrived now. He only said, after I came out of the formation, I received a letter from fellow Taoist and quickly rushed over. I've been here for an hour, but I still haven't entered the formation. No one could intervene in the battle within the formation diagram. They could only wait to find out the result. Zhang Yan knew very well that with Feng Haiyang's current powers, it was only a matter of time before he broke through the formation. Luo Qingyu did not expect to win either. He was just stalling for time. It was a pity that the formation was not easy to refine. If it was destroyed, it would take dozens of years to restore it to its original state. The two of them exchanged a few more words. The blue clouds in front of them rippled as if they were being ravaged by a violent gale. In the blink of an eye, it became shapeless. Both of them raised their eyes to look over, and after a short moment, they suddenly heard thunderclaps resound by their ears as the azure cloud collapsed with a bang, and then they saw two familiar streaks flying out from within. Not long after they flew out, another strand of surging yellow smoke flew out endlessly, and it surged with a baleful aura as it followed closely behind them. The first golden red light reached the top of the cloud and suddenly turned around. A ball of fire that was as dazzling as colored glass flew out. The yellow smoke seemed to notice that this fire was unusual and didn't dare to touch it at all. It immediately retreated thousands of feet away. With a shake, it released a black tide that was more than 10 miles long. The waves rolled and pushed, and the sound of the tide shook the sky. Another wave surged, and in the blink of an eye, thousands of demons flew out and rushed over menacingly. After Sun Huaying arrived, he had already straightened out his chi meridians and recovered to his peak condition. His entire body was filled with sword will. Seeing that Feng Haiyang had come out of the formation diagram, he could not hold himself back anymore. He let out a clear whistle and dashed forward like a white rainbow. At this moment, the two conveyance lights in the sky suddenly split up. One of them went to meet his opponent, while the other one swayed and flew towards the peak where Zhang Yan was. The conveyance light seemed to be drunk and could not control itself. With a loud bang, it crashed into the peak and created a shallow pit. Luo Qingyu quickly walked out. He looked a little tired. He did not even wipe off the dust on his clothes. He stepped forward and grabbed Zhang Yan's sleeve. He said in a low voice, "Junior brother Zhang." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fortunately, I did not disappoint you." Luo Qingyu's eyes were immediately filled with joy. After a while, he calmed himself down and let out a sigh of relief. He said, "I've been fighting with Feng Haiyang in the formation map for more than 2 hours. This man is really powerful. He destroyed all 72 of my green mountains of wind and thunder. My mana has been depleted and I need to rest here. I hope you can protect me, junior brother." Zhang Yan looked up and saw that Huaxian and Sun Huaying were enough to handle the situation. He did not need to intervene for the time being. He nodded and said, "I am here. Senior brother Luo, don't worry." Luo Qingyu cupped his hands at him and immediately sat down cross-legged to meditate. At this moment, in the sky, Huoxian was fearlessly fighting with the torrential water. In the sky, there were continuous sounds of collisions. It was a majestic scene. He did not choose to fight in this way because he was willing to sacrifice his strengths and take advantage of his weaknesses. He had thought it through in advance. After he was caught up by Feng Haiyang, they had a fierce fight. When he was on the brink of defeat, Luo Qingyu arrived in time. He was able to hide in the formation diagram to meditate. At this moment, his mana was fully recovered and his spirit was full. He had secretly estimated that after Feng Haiyang got rid of Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying, he did not stop chasing after him. After that, he fought with Zhong Muqing and Luo Qingyu. Even if he was a Yuanying level 3 cultivator, his mana would be exhausted. At this moment, Feng Haiyang might not be any better than him. Now that there were 4 of them here, he did not believe that they could not defeat this person. How could Feng Haiyang not understand Huoxian's intention? However, he did not care. The remaining people of Shenmen were here. As long as they could stall him, there was no need to rush. Even if he did not have enough mana, he could retreat in time. No one could catch up with him. He turned his mana and shook the torrential water. Then he summoned thousands of demons and commanded them to rush forward. Huoxian shouted loudly. He didn't retreat at all and courageously met them head-on. His entire body was surrounded by the brilliance of golden flames, and he flew out for over 100 feet. He was as dazzling as the blazing sun. The clouds of fire and golden flames densely covered an area of 1.5 kilometers. The thousands of devils were like moths flying into the flames as they collided with each other, causing sparks to fly out incessantly. Most of the devils were incinerated before they could even reach the inner circle. Just when Feng Haiyang was about to activate his mana again, a ray of sword radiance suddenly shot towards him. Before it arrived, the murderous aura had already pierced through the canopy and made his eyes hurt. He could not help but frown. In the face of this killing sword technique, other than attacking, there was no other way to deal with it. With a low growl, the tribulation water beneath his feet rose up and he hid himself. However, with a single slash of his sword, the tribulation water was split into 2. The other half of the tribulation water spun around as if it had lost its master. With a loud rumble, the tribulation water began to pour towards Zhang Yan and Luo Qingyu. When Huoxian saw this, he waved his sleeves. Golden flames rose to the sky and melted the torrential water. However, the torrential water was so strong that it was like the Milky Way was overturned. It was not something that he could stop in a hurry. Zhang Yan looked at the torrential water. He shook his shoulder calmly and a yellow aura flew up behind him. It condensed into a giant hand and stopped the torrential water. The torrential water was especially muddy. It broke through the spiritual aura and leaked through the gaps between his fingers. However, before he could attack again, he heard the sound of wind and thunder and it was blown away. Zhang Yan looked back and saw that Luo Qingyu had already stood up. He was standing there in high spirits. Obviously, his mana had recovered. The torrential water in the sky seemed to have noticed the change. It suddenly faded and turned into a yellow smoke. It rose to the sky and disappeared. Zhang Yan felt the pressure on his head lighten. He waved his sleeves and dispersed his mana. When Huoxian saw that Feng Haiyang had retreated, he called out to Sun Huaying, "Fellow Taoist Sun, it's useless to chase after him." Sun Huaying nodded slightly. The underworld escape technique was not inferior to the sword escape technique. Feng Haiyang also had the heaven and earth seal technique. It would be useless to chase after him if they did not travel together. The 2 of them stopped their techniques and descended from the sky. They landed in front of Zhang and Luo. Luo Qingyu took a step forward and said, "Senior brother, junior brother Zhang." Huoxian raised his hand to stop him. He said in a deep voice, "Feng Haiyang is not far away. This is not the time to talk. We need to find a suitable place to talk." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There's no need for that. I'll just cast a small spell later." He cast a spell and flicked his finger. After a short while, a thick fog appeared in front of the 4 of them. The fog spread out in an instant. Soon, the surroundings became a vast expanse of whiteness. It was like a sea of clouds floating in the air. Hua Xian nodded and praised, "Good technique. We're not afraid of being spied on anymore." Luo Qingyu cupped his hands and said excitedly, "Senior brother, junior brother Zhang has obtained the Junyang pot." When Hua Xian heard this, his expression was still very calm. He did not look excited at all. He looked at Zhang Yan and said, "Junior brother, can you take it out and have a look?" Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He took out the Junyang pot from his sleeve and held it in his palm. He said, "The treasure pot is here." Only then did Sun Huaying know that the Junyang pot was obtained by Zhang Yan. She looked at him in surprise and her eyes flickered. Hua Xian looked at it for a while and confirmed that it was not a fake. He said in a deep voice, "Junior brother Luo, Zhenren Sun, let's not waste any more time. Let's take away the qi of essence as soon as possible." Luo Qingyu and Sun Huaying had no objection. They took out the talisman and activated it slightly. A thin strand of qi of essence was drawn out from the mouth of the pot. They then took out the jade bottles that they carried with them and kept the qi of essence. After the three of them kept the qi of essence, Zhang Yan said, "Senior brother Hua, senior brother Luo, fellow Taoist Sun, since we have obtained Jun Yang's qi of essence, we don't have to worry about our future. Why don't we work together to eliminate Feng Haiyang and make Xian Men the winner of this sword battle? What do you think?" Luo Qingyu was quite tempted. If they won, they could still cultivate here for a few more years, which was a great benefit. However, Hua Xian thought for a while and shook his head. He said, "We have obtained Jun Yang's qi of essence. We don't have to be obsessed with winning the sword battle. It's best for us to retreat now." As the leader of the 10 disciples of Qinsong, his main goal was to bring the disciples of the sword battle back to the sect safely. Feng Haiyang's supernatural power and Taoist spells were extremely brilliant. His mana was also better than theirs. They had no choice but to fight with him earlier. But now that they had obtained the qi of essence, if they continued to fight, they might make mistakes and cause casualties. It would not be worth it. Chapter 602. Hua Xian looked at Zhang Yan and sighed. He said apologetically, "Junior brother, I know that if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to obtain Jun Yang's qi of essence. However, Feng Haiyang's escape technique is better than mine and junior brother Luo's, and he also has the heaven and earth confinement technique. If the four of us work together, even if we gain the upper hand, how can we stop him if he wants to escape?" Zhang Yan had expected Feng Haiyang to respond in such a manner. He had already made a plan in his heart. It would be best if he could gather everyone's strength to kill Feng Haiyang. However, if that failed, he would definitely not retreat. He would use all his strength to fight Feng Haiyang. Therefore, he smiled in a carefree manner and cupped his hands together. "Senior's intentions are reasonable. In that case, I will not force you." Hua Xian was slightly relieved. He actually owed Zhang Yan a huge favor by obtaining Jun Yang's qi of essence. If Zhang Yan insisted, he could not refuse. At this moment, Sun Huaying suddenly said, "Wait, everyone. I have a method that might be worth a try." When he saw everyone looking at him, he said seriously, "I have a divine skill called One Thought Heart Sword. It can kill the enemy with a single thought. However, after this sword is used, the user's mana will be exhausted and he will not be able to defend against the enemy. Therefore, someone must protect him." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. With the Shaoqing disciple's temperament, it was not surprising that Sun Huaying was willing to stay and fight with him. However, he did not expect him to have such a divine sword skill. If he did not obtain Jun Yang's qi of essence, he would not have said it so easily. Hua Xian had never heard of this swordsmanship before, so he was unable to judge from the few words. It sounded extremely impressive, so it must be the Shaoqing secret art that was rarely publicized. He thought for a while and asked in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Sun, how confident are you?" Sun Huaying answered without hesitation, "If I can kill Feng Haiyang's Dharma body, then he will definitely die." Luo Qingyu asked doubtfully, "Enlightened Sun, Feng Haiyang has the death substitution technique. How are you going to find out where his Dharma body is?" Sun Huaying said calmly, "Feng Haiyang has fought with others several times. It's not like he's flawless. I've been watching for a long time, and now I have some clues. Although the netherworld spring had been passed down for tens of thousands of years, it had never used the death substitution technique. Feng Haiyang had been slashed several times, but he did not die. The external body was a manifestation of the Dao technique, while the real body was hidden within the calamity water. Every time the tribulation water dispersed, he would take a closer look and discover something different. It was most likely the hiding place of the Dharmakaya. Huoxian could not help but ponder. If it was really as Sun Huaying said, then he could give it a try. If he could eliminate Feng Haiyang, then he would naturally be willing. After all, the fortuitous encounters in this place were hard to come by, and it was not a difficult task to protect others. It was much better than fighting to the death. Thinking of this, he turned around and asked, "Junior brother Luo, what do you think?" Luo Qing, you heard this. He knew that Huoxian's attitude had softened a little. He cupped his hands and replied, "Senior martial brother, please leave now. I'm not willing to do so." Huoxian nodded and turned to Sun Huaying, "Fellow Taoist Sun. Junior brother Luo and I have the towering cloud tower. No matter what the outcome is, we can protect you. When you fight with Feng Haiyang later, you can just use your sword." Zhang Yan nodded and said with a serious expression, "I will do my best to protect you." Sun Huaying was very straightforward. He cupped his hands and said, "All right, my life is in your hands." Since they were going to fight with Feng Haiyang later, they naturally had to be prepared. After everyone finished their discussion, they sat down on the peak and meditated to adjust their qi. Feng Haiyang did not go far either. Just now, he had used up a lot of his mana. He hid behind a hidden cliff and recovered his mana. After half an hour, he felt that his mana had recovered. He leaped up to the sky and looked at the place where everyone was. When he saw there was no movement from within the mist for a long time, he couldn't help but feel bewildered in his heart. With a thought, he took out the sun bath mirror and shone it towards that direction. The mirror light had only just passed when it was reflected back by a ray of light, causing him to still be unable to see the exact situation of the four of them. He pondered and kept the mirror. As long as the four of them had not left, he did not have to be too anxious. He did not have to rush to deal with them. Even if he could succeed, he would still be in danger of getting injured. He might as well wait until he found the Junyang treasure pot and refined more demons. It would not be too late to fight with them then. He waited patiently for a long time. Suddenly, he sensed something in his mind. After a slight inspection, it seemed that he had found the Junyang treasure pot. He could not help but feel happy. He focused his mind and looked at it with the demon's eyes. After a while, he frowned. Although the treasure pot was the same as the one he had seen before, and it would also hide at home, he still felt that something was wrong. He suspected that it was a fake. After thinking for a while, he made a hand sign and ordered a few demons to rush forward. If the treasure pot was real, he would definitely not be able to catch it. However, when he was using the hand sign, a ray of light from a mirror suddenly shone on his body. For a moment, it was as if he was exposed to the scorching sun. He could not help but narrow his eyes and looked up. He saw 4 rays of light flying out from the clouds and heading towards him. Among them, there were 2 rays of sword light that were extremely fast. In a flash, they were not far away. Sun Huaying and Zhang Yan attacked from the left and right. Although they had a way to defeat the enemy, if they retreated, it would arouse Feng Haiyang's suspicion. In order to not expose their intentions, he rushed to the front with Zhang Yan. Feng Haiyang sneered. He did not care about anything else for the time being. He changed his hand sign and the sound of rolling waves came from below him. The water from the tribulation broke into dozens of mountains and created a huge wave that was 1,000 feet tall. It rolled towards the 2 of them. Zhang Yan and Sun Huaying instantly felt the sky above them darken, and when they raised their heads to look, they saw that they were blocked by the tribulation water from all directions. Before this monstrous wave, they seemed extremely tiny, but both of their expressions remained the same. Zhang Yanqing shouted, and a ray of watery light flashed out from the high cloud above him. With a loud crashing sound, a boundless tide also rose up, and it fearlessly welcomed the tribulation water. Feng Haiyang raised his eyebrows. After a few rounds of fighting, he knew that Zhang Yan's ray of water could subdue the devil. However, the water from the tribulation was different. It was formed from spiritual power. Even if it was swallowed, it might not be able to suppress it. In the end, it was very likely that they would end up in a battle of spiritual power. His mind raced. He felt that his spiritual power was far superior to his opponent's. If he could seize this opportunity to shatter that Tao technique, it would be one less threat to him. Therefore, with a loud shout, he pushed his spiritual power to another level. At this instant, the sound of tribulation water shook the sky, and its surging momentum was ferocious to the extreme. A ray of light appeared in Zhang Yan's eyes. He channeled his spiritual power and heard a muffled sound. From within the ray of water, another ray of yellow light flew out. In an instant, it grew to 1,000 feet in size. The turbid tide crashed into it and a loud rumble was heard. It sounded like thunder. Although it was loud, it could not move the tide. He was using the true light of water as a cover and hid the true light of earth behind it. This was to trick Feng Haiyang into releasing his spiritual power to attack. This way, Feng Haiyang would be restrained and create an opportunity for the person behind him to attack. This attack did not work. Feng Haiyang was slightly surprised. Just as he was about to channel his spiritual power again, he suddenly heard a whooshing sound. He glanced over and saw a few golden dragon spears piercing through the air. They were flying towards him like arrows. He did not have time to dodge them. With a single thought, the 4 devils materialized and blocked all 4 directions. As soon as he was done, he heard clanging sounds echoing in his ears. He did not have time to look. He raised his hand and pointed upwards. From the tip of his finger, a gust of strong wind was formed. It whistled upwards and deflected a golden dragon spear that was coming at him from above. Then he waved his sleeve. It was as if the sky and earth were flipped. The tribulation water that was more than 10 miles long suddenly swirled up. Huo Xian and Luo Qingyu had also rushed to within 10,000 feet of the tribulation water. As the tribulation water started to churn, they immediately felt the pressure increase. They both took out their protective treasures and channeled their spiritual power to stabilize themselves. However, since the tribulation water was using spiritual power to suppress others, they could not move at all. Feng Haiyang flicked his sleeves and rode the wave into the sky. He opened up his 5 fingers and made a grabbing motion downwards. A formless spell spread out and instantly enveloped everything within a radius of 8 miles. Then he raised his fist and hammered it on his chest. With a shout, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of white light that was several feet long. Zhang Yan felt that his body was suddenly tied up. He knew that he had been captured by the trapping technique again. He looked around and saw what Feng Haiyang was doing. He reacted quickly and immediately closed his eyes. At the same time, he used his spiritual power to summon the star's sword orb. It turned into more than 20 sword rays and flew around him like meteors. He thought to himself, this person's spiritual power is stronger. He really has the upper hand. Whether he advances or retreats, it's up to him. No wonder senior brother Hua thought that he could not win against this person. Feng Haiyang flicked his finger and a thin demonic smoke was released. When it reached the ground, it turned into a big dark cloud and dispersed. Once again, it blocked everyone's vision. After casting the technique, he stamped his feet and suddenly lowered his body. In a split second, he was in front of Luo Qingyu. With a cold look on his face, he slowly lifted his sleeve and waved it in front of him. Then, a black wind that was filled with evil qi flew out, whistling. Luo Qingyu's expression turned serious. He knew how powerful this technique was. The Yang couple from Yuan Yang sect were indirectly killed by this technique. If he did not try to avoid it, he would definitely die even if he had the protection of a treasure. However, if he tried to avoid it, it would only expose his weakness. Therefore, he had to choose the right time. However, he was after all one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong school. In such a critical situation, there was no trace of panic in his eyes. He raised 2 fingers and pointed at the top of his head. The pen-shaped treasure suddenly turned upside down and spat out a puff of green smoke. Immediately, a dense fog appeared and covered his body. Only then did he try his best to activate his spiritual power and fly up into the sky. However, he had only flown a few feet high when suddenly, a pale white light flew towards him. In the blink of an eye, he was cut in half from the waist. Chapter 603. Feng Haiyang's dark axe of dark dantian could absorb the essence and blood of any cultivator it killed. However, after cutting Luo Qingyu in half, there was no benefit at all. Feng Haiyang immediately knew something was wrong. When he looked again, he saw that there was no blood coming out from the cut. Instead, there was a green color. His upper and lower body seemed to be pulled together, and he looked as if nothing had happened. With a shout, he turned into a green light and flew away. This was the supernatural power of void qi of life. It could regenerate a broken body and regenerate bones and flesh. Even if one's head was chopped off, it could be reattached. Therefore, this technique consumed a lot of mana. After Luo Qingyu used it, he had no more energy to fight and could only retreat from the battle. Just as Feng Haiyang was about to give chase, a ray of sword light suddenly flew towards him. It was as fast as lightning, and there was no way for him to dodge. In just a flash, his head had already been chopped off. The sword light went back and forth, and then it was divided into more than 10 pieces. The severed body parts all fell into the water below, and suddenly disappeared without a trace. Sun Huaying used his mind's eye to stare at the water. At this moment, the outside world suddenly became silent. There was no sound and light. His mind suddenly became clear like a water mirror. The one-thought heart sword was a secret skill of the Killing Sword sect. It could sense the qi and communicate with the spirit. As long as one could locate the enemy's whereabouts, one could kill the enemy with a single thought. If Feng Haiyang wanted to show himself, he would definitely be triggered. When he showed himself again, it would be the time for him to strike with his sword. It seemed like he had waited for a long time, but in reality, it was only a short moment. The sword pill suddenly shook violently and an undetectable spiritual vigor appeared in his mind. Sun Huaying opened his eyes and his mind moved. A cold sword will that could pierce through the sky filled the whole area. At practically the exact same moment, a pool of tribulation water dispersed out of thin air 320 meters away from him, and an inaudible shrill cry sounded out from within it. As he struck with his sword, it was as if his spirit, qi, and spirit were all sucked out. His body suddenly became empty and it was difficult for him to even fly in the air. He struggled to lift his eyes and looked forward. He saw that the demonic qi of the water seemed to have lost control. It was slowly fading away. Did it work? Not only did Zhang Yan's expression not loosen up, it even became slightly solemn. That sword strike seemed to be effective, and even the heaven and earth lock technique had dissipated. However, he still felt that this great enemy was still there. At this time, his mind inexplicably jolted, and he turned around and shouted, "Fellow Taoist Sun, be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, a devil suddenly appeared beside Sun Huaying. It opened its bloody mouth and bit at him while laughing maniacally. Zhang Yan knew that he wouldn't be able to defend himself after he drew his sword. Since he had promised to protect him, he was prepared. With a flick of his finger, a drop of Xianming heavy water flew out. With a dang sound, the demon was knocked back a few steps. At the same time, he waved his sleeves and a gale rose. It swept him several miles away. Although he had gotten rid of this predicament, he still didn't dare to relax. He circulated his mana, and the cloud above his head suddenly trembled. Then a grand water light spread out. It was like thousands of rivers and thousands of whirlpools, and it produced a boundless traction force. Even if there were treasures and devils attacking, it would still be able to slow them down. At this moment, the water spun, and Feng Haiyang's figure appeared again. He stood on the water, and his clothes fluttered in the wind. He seemed to be completely fine. He stared at Sun Huaying for a moment, and it was unknown what he was thinking. He revealed a reminiscing expression and sighed, "Taoist Sun, good sword technique." There was a reason why he was able to avoid the sword of one thought. When he fought with Ban Xiaoming from the Shaoqing sect in the past, Ban Xiaoming used this sword in the end. However, Ban Xiaoming didn't seem to be proficient in it at that time, and he couldn't control it as he pleased. Feng Haiyang was able to dodge it by luck, and he also saw some of its profundities. Thus, he was prepared in advance. If it wasn't for that, it would be hard to say the ending. Huoxian's heart sank. At this moment, at least 2 of the 4 of them had lost their ability to fight, and it was practically impossible for them to kill this person. It seemed like they could only retreat from the Star Stone. Feng Haiyang suddenly smiled. He raised his hand, and 3 devils flew out from behind him, and they flew towards Huoxian, Zhang Yan, and Sun Huang. After that, he tapped his foot on the ground and flew up. He transformed into a strand of yellow smoke that tore through the sky and flew straight into the clouds. The direction he was pointing at was surprisingly the direction that Luo Qingyu had retreated to earlier. When he saw that Sun Huang had Zhang Yan's protection by her side, and that her mana couldn't recover in a short period of time, he decisively gave up the thought of killing her and turned to look for another prey. It could be said that he displayed his advantage of being able to come and go as he pleased, and he displayed his advantage of being unpredictable to the extreme. This move was very sudden, and Zhang Yan couldn't get away from it for a while. Although Huoxian reacted to it, the opponent's underworld escaping technique was too fast, and it was not inferior to the flying sword's light. Huoxian was also powerless, and within a breath or two he was left far behind. At this moment, a loud noise was heard from afar. The 3 of them turned around and saw a majestic palace with jade pillars. It was obvious that Luo Qingyu had no choice but to summon the great lofty cloud palace in order to save his life. Huoxian's expression changed. With Luo Qingyu's current mana, he definitely wouldn't be able to hold on for long, and he had no choice but to catch up and help him. As he thought of this, he turned around and said, "It's useless to stay here any longer, junior brother Zhang, fellow Daoist Sun, please leave quickly." As soon as he finished speaking, he activated his mana twice more, and transformed into a fiery golden rainbow, rushing towards them. Sun Huang circulated her magic a few times, and regained some of her energy. She said to Zhang Yan in a serious tone, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you don't have to worry about me, you can go and help fellow Taoist Luo, I'll leave on my own." Previously, the 4 of them had agreed that if his sword failed, they would give up on killing this person, and each of them would find a way to escape. Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "Feng Haiyang is very good at making a ruckus. If I leave, he will definitely have some tricks up his sleeves. Since fellow Taoist's mana isn't strong enough, why don't you leave first?" Sun Huang thought for a while, and nodded, "All right." He took out the talisman, and silently recited the incantation. With a slight movement, the last bit of mana left in his body dissipated. Even so, he still stood straight and did not fall. He looked at Zhang Yan, and solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, thanks to your protection, I'm still alive. If there's anything in the future, you can come to Shaoqing to look for me." Zhang Yan nodded, and raised his hands to return the gesture. At this moment, the talisman trembled, and a brilliant brilliance enveloped Sun Huang. Then, a pillar of golden light shot up, and instantly flew into the sky, disappearing without a trace. Huoxian rushed to a mile away from the cloud tower, and he looked around. Feng Haiyang was nowhere to be seen, but layers of tribulation water surrounded him, crashing against the cloud tower's restriction. Seeing that the situation was urgent, he didn't take a closer look. He shook his body, and 2 clouds appeared above his head. One was lightning fire, and the other was metal wind. At the same time, they landed, blasting apart a portion of the tribulation water, and he charged into the inner circle. The demons sensed the spiritual qi of a living person's flesh and blood. They were like flies that smelled blood, and they swarmed out of the tribulation water, gathering toward Huoxian. Huoxian's gaze shifted, and he understood. No matter how high his cultivation was, he wouldn't be able to last long under the siege of the seemingly endless demons. He was about to die here. His expression was as calm as ever as he raised his hand, summoning the 9 great sun dragon sparrow spears into the air. He then pointed a finger forward, and the 9 spears shot forth in quick succession, creating mountain-shattering sounds as they tore through all obstacles in their path. For a moment, nothing could stop him. Using the power of the talisman, he quickly reached the bottom of the cloud tower and shouted, "Junior brother Luo." As if he heard the shout. Once the restriction door opened, he shook his body and entered it. He saw Luo Qingyu sitting in the middle of the hall, his head full of sweat, and he was on the verge of collapsing. He took a few steps forward, took the talisman, and infused his mana into it, and said in a deep voice, "Junior brother Luo, quickly take out the talisman, I will take care of the cloud tower for you." Luo Qingyu knew that with his exhausted body, even if he stayed, he would only be a burden to the others. He reached out to take out the talisman, but he seemed to have thought of something and he stopped and said, "If I leave, how will you leave?" The tribulation water was everywhere, and even if he could leave, Huoxian would not be able to escape without help. Huoxian said, "It's okay, I have a way to escape, don't worry, junior brother." Now, the longer he delayed, the more mana Huoxian would use, so Luo Qingyu did not say anything more, and quickly took out the talisman, held it in his palm, and chanted a spell. Then he shook the talisman lightly, and the talisman floated in the air. After about 10 breaths, the talisman unfolded, and a golden light wrapped around his body, and with a loud bang, he flew out of the open door. Huoxian waited for him to leave, and then shook the talisman, and the towering cloud tower turned into a clear light, and entered his sleeve. Without the talisman as a shield, the tribulation water and the demons all rushed in, and the whistling sound was loud, covering the sky. He took a deep breath and stood firmly on the cloud. He raised his hand and formed a spell. After a short while, he heard the sound of a drum and a stone pillar flew out from the cloud. With a loud rumble, it grew to a height of 1,000 feet before it stopped. Countless strange talismans appeared on the pillar and golden rays of lightning flashed. It protected the area within a radius of a mile. Although the tribulation water continued to press in, it wouldn't be able to hold it for long. However, it would be enough for him to escape. He took out the talisman from his sleeve and chanted a spell. Suddenly, he felt his body empty, and his mana was gone, and the talisman was already floating. At this moment, there was a sudden violent vibration, and he could not help but tremble. He looked straight ahead and saw that the tribulation water had suddenly increased in momentum, and like a collapsing river, it was rushing in fiercely, and the speed at which it was pressing in was more than twice as fast. In just a few breaths, it was already within 100 feet of him. Huoxian's expression was solemn, and his body was as steady as a rock, and he did not show any signs of panic. Just when the tribulation water was about to hit the tip of his nose, the talisman suddenly shone brightly, and with a loud bang, it wrapped around him, broke through the turbid waves, and flew into the sky. More than 10 miles away, on top of a towering cliff, Zhang Yan raised his head and looked at the golden light flying away. In the blink of an eye, the 3 people had left, and he was the only one left in the Star Stone. He had gained a lot this time, and if he left now, he would not lose anything, but he decided to stay. Although it was rare to achieve the nascent soul in 100 years, but under the 3 great tribulations, anyone who was careless would be turned into powder. Only by competing step by step and grabbing all the fated chances could he have a chance to break free from the shackles and transcend the mortal world. The Star Stone here could save him dozens of years of cultivation, so he could not miss it. Anyone who stood in his way was his enemy. Other than Tai Heng Grand Ancestor and Shen Lin too, Feng Haiyang was the strongest opponent he had ever met in his life. With his strength alone, he was not confident that he could defeat Feng Haiyang, so he could only fight with his life on the line. Zhang Yan took out the Junyang pot, threw it to the top of the mountain and shouted, "Feng Haiyang, the Junyang pot is here, do you dare to come and take it?" His voice rumbled, and it shook the wilderness, echoing endlessly. After a while, a black shadow suddenly appeared in the sky, and it was a huge tide that was more than 10 miles long, and the sound was earth-shattering. It was rushing towards him. Zhang Yan raised his head and let out a long roar. He took a step forward, and with a rumbling sound, the entire starstone trembled as his foot landed. In an instant, he had stepped into the 4th stage of the strength path. Chapter 604. P.S. There's one more time at night. In the Chengyuan Gorge, Daoren and the rest of the Xian Gates members were all waiting on Qingdan Peak. However, their expressions were solemn. When Elder Shen returned, they knew that the current situation was extremely disadvantageous to the Xian Gate. They didn't expect Feng Haiyang to be so powerful. He actually achieved the 3rd level of Yuaning within the Star Stone and defeated everyone from the Xian Gate. Now that Yuxiao School had already retreated, if Qinsong School and Shaoqing Sect were also defeated, then the Xian Gate would lose this sword battle. When Zhong Muqing returned, they wanted to ask what was going on. However, he didn't come out, so they didn't know what was going on. However, if the situation was okay, then he wouldn't ignore it. This caused everyone's hearts to be shrouded in a layer of haze. Daoren couldn't help but sigh. I wonder what's going on now. The surroundings were silent. No one said anything. After waiting for another 2 hours, Butian Pavilion's elder Lu suddenly frowned and said, "A fellow cultivator is coming down." Everyone felt it too. They all raised their heads and saw a golden light descending from the heavenly cloud. Doran's gaze followed it. Seeing it land on Shaoqing Sect's peak, he exclaimed, "It's Shaoqing Sect's spiritual master Sun." Someone cried out, "Could it be that spiritual master Sun was also defeated?" Everyone's heart sank. Even Shaoqing's killing sword was defeated. There were only 3 people on the cloud. How could they compete with Feng Haiyang? One of the Xian Gate's elders forced a smile and said, "Fellow cultivators, there's no need to be anxious. Why don't you ask spiritual master Sun what's going on? Maybe things will turn for the better." Everyone knew in their hearts that these were merely words used to deceive others and themselves. Those who went to fight were all extraordinary. If they weren't forced, they wouldn't be willing to retreat from the Star Stone so easily. They must have cultivated there for 3 years. Not long after the golden light disappeared, there was movement in the sky. 2 golden lights shot down from the cloud one after the other. This time, they landed on Qinsong School's peak. It should be Spiritual Master Hua and Spiritual Master Luo. Daoren sighed and said, "I didn't expect that even these 2 would be defeated. I guess there is no one left who can compete with Feng Haiyang for Jun Yang's spiritual essence." At this point, he shook his head dejectedly. He had thought that the Celestial Gate would definitely win this sword battle. However, he didn't expect that all of his essence energy would be taken by the demonic sect. When he thought about how the demonic calamity still had to continue for another 1,000 years, his heart sank. Elder Lu suddenly said, "That's not right. There's still one person who hasn't come down yet." Daoren was startled. He thought for a moment and said, "Is it Sage Zhang?" An elder of the Xianmen sect from the Nanhua sect said, "So what if Zhenren Zhang is fine? How can he be a match for Feng Haiyang alone?" Elder Lu, however, looked at the sky with a burning gaze and said slowly, "Not necessarily." On the peak of Qinsong School, 2 beams of light fell one after another. Huaxian and Luo Qingyu appeared at the same time. Zhong Muqing had been waiting for a long time. He came up to greet them and asked with concern, "Senior Martial Brother Hua. Junior Martial Brother Luo, how is it?" Huaxian returned the greeting and said with a smile, "Thanks to Junior Martial Brother's clever plan, Jun Yang's essence energy is in our hands." Zhong Muqing's expression immediately relaxed. He smiled and looked at the sky again. He asked curiously, "Where is Junior Martial Brother Zhang?" Luo Qingyu was shocked and said, "Why, Junior Martial Brother Zhang hasn't come down yet?" Zhong Muqing's eyes flashed when he heard this, but he shook his head slowly. Luo Qingyu said doubtfully, "This? Could it be that Junior Martial Brother Zhang couldn't escape in time?" Huaxian pondered for a moment and said, "With Junior Martial Brother Zhang's ability, if he wanted to leave, he would have come out by now. There is only one reason why he didn't take out the Star Stone." Before he could finish his sentence, a loud noise suddenly came from the blue sky. The rumbling sound was endless, and the mountains and rivers in the gorge were responding to it. No one knew what had happened. Luo Qingyu recovered after a while and asked, "Senior Martial Brother, what do you think Junior Martial Brother Zhang wants to do?" Huaxian looked up at the sky with a strange light in his eyes. He said, "Maybe he wants to stay and fight with Feng Haiyang." Inside the star stone, as Zhang Yan took a step out, the joints in his body made a series of cracking sounds, and his whole body kept increasing. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. A surging momentum rushed up to the sky. Only after reaching a height of 600 feet did the rising energy finally stop. He clenched his fists, and the star stone emitted a loud rumbling sound. At this moment, his appearance was different from before. His eyes were dark, and when he looked around, he looked fierce. His eyebrows were red and purple, and they were the same color as his hair. They were dancing in the air like fire. Behind him, there was a black flame, and it was as if he was surrounded by wind and fire. In between his eyebrows, the 9 subduing magic slip was waiting quietly, and it made a soft sound. The colorful light shone through the canopy, and from afar, he looked like a demon. Feng Haiyang seemed to have noticed his change. The water that was rushing towards him paused for a moment, and it seemed like it wanted to fight with him. Suddenly, a 1,000-feet-high wave was formed, and in the blink of an eye, there were 5,000 or 6,000 demons rushing out, and they rushed towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan was not afraid at all. He shouted, and his voice was like a flood. He took a step forward, and with a bang he punched the ground. In an instant, a shocking shockwave swept through the air. With a loud bang, 3,000 to 4,000 demons exploded in the air, shattering into countless strands of essence chi. The remaining 1,000 fearlessly rushed forward and bit his body. However, after a series of biting and tearing sounds, only the sound of ka could be heard. Unexpectedly, he couldn't move at all. Zhang Yan smiled and he raised his hand. A vast light of water rose, and all the demons that were clinging to him were sucked into it. He opened his mouth, and a giant whirlpool appeared out of nowhere, and it sucked all the essence chi in the sky back. He turned his Xian Qi, and it was channeled into the demon's subduing magic slip. With a little effort, the slip produced some essence Qi, and it fed back to his limbs and bones. After reaching the 4th level of the divine contract, he could use the slip to absorb essence Qi at any time, and he did not need to meditate anymore. Those demons were what the demon slip loved to absorb. As long as they could not break his body, no matter how many came, he had nothing to fear. This was also the reason why he dared to compete with Feng Haiyang. With a splash, Feng Haiyang emerged from the water, and he gradually went up with the waves. He looked at Zhang Yan, who was like a giant in front of him, and was a little surprised. He thought to himself, "This looks like a strength method, but why have I never heard of this method in Qinsong school?" Although he had only released the thousands of demons to test Zhang Yan, he had never expected that they would be destroyed so easily by Zhang Yan. They couldn't even gather together again. If he wanted to use them again, he would have to expend a lot of his magic power to summon them again. But since he had suffered once, he wouldn't make the same mistake again. With a cold shout, he raised his hand and took out an incantation gesture, summoning the 4 devils that had been fed with Jun Yang's spiritual essence. With a command from his mind, the 4 devils immediately let out a ferocious laugh, shook their bodies, and turned into 4 rapid shadows that floated forward. The 4 demons flew extremely fast, and they were not any slower than their master's underworld escape technique. They flew back and forth around Zhang Yan's body like insects, and as soon as they found an opening, they would pounce and bite. Zhang Yan sneered, and he reached out and grabbed a handful of the black gas around him. He used his mana, and in an instant, it condensed into a big hammer in his hand. He swung the hammer horizontally, and the first demon's body turned from solid to ethereal, wanting to dodge the hammer. However, the hammer seemed to be unusual, and with a clang, it still hit the demon. The demon let out a whimper, and it retreated with a painful cry. When he raised the big hammer again, and was about to swing it again, 2 of the demons were quite cunning, and they immediately moved to the sides and dodged. Only one was quite brave. Not only did it not dodge, it nimbly spun around, turned around, and bit the back of his hand, instantly tearing a bloody wound. Zhang Yan's expression did not change, and he grabbed it with a backhand. With a shout, he used all the force in his body, and in an instant, it exploded into a ball of essence chi. His chest swelled up, and he sucked it into his body through his nose and mouth, allowing the demon subduing slip to refine it. After he grew taller, although his mana did not increase, every movement he made was filled with great strength. If he didn't care about his mana and turned into 1,000 feet tall, he would be able to move mountains and overturn seas and rivers. No matter how tough this demon's body was, it wouldn't be able to block this mountain-like strength. He raised his hand and looked at the wound. He circulated his chi, and threads of red light and purple flames came out of the wound. The wound closed up, and in an instant, it was as good as new. Previously, he didn't know the abilities of the demon, so he relied on the strength of his physical body to test it out. Now, he knew that the demon was powerful and could injure him. Although it was only a small hindrance, he couldn't allow it to wreak havoc. He had to do his best to stop it from wasting his magic power for no reason. Fighting with Feng Haiyang was not a battle that could be decided in a short period of time. He had to be prepared for the worst, and he might even have to compete with his mana. Fortunately, since the sword battle, he had hidden the bodies of all the cultivators he took in the Calamity Water. After he stepped into the 4th stage, he could use the demon subduing slip to turn it into his own essence chi. Therefore, even if it came to that, he did not need to panic. Because it was not easy to refine those few demons, Feng Haiyang was afraid that they would be injured again, so he used a spell to summon them back. Even if he did not have this spell, as a cultivator of the 3rd stage of Yuanying, he did have some tricks up his sleeve. Earlier, when he fought others, he had to deal with a few opponents every single time, so he had a lot of worries. Every single time he attacked, he had to be careful so as to avoid making a mistake. But now, it was different when he was only dealing with Zhang Yan, and he could display his full strength. He shouted, reaching out with his hand, spreading his 5 fingers and pressing downwards, actually using the heaven and earth sealing technique. His wrist turned downwards, and behind him, more than 10 li of tribulation water surged up with a rumbling sound, pressing down in one go. He first used the heaven and earth sealing technique to trap his opponent, and then used the calamity water to suppress him. He was competing with his opponent's mana. Even though Zhang Yan's physical body could become extremely large, his mana would not increase. As long as he could restrict his opponent's body, Feng Haiyang was confident that he could suppress him. Zhang Yan suddenly felt a restraining force enveloping his body. He lowered his body slightly and took a deep breath. Then he let out a thunderous roar and threw a punch. This punch was like the sky and earth were turning upside down. Within a radius of 10,000 feet, the wind howled, and the spiritual energy was like a tide. It was exploding. Everywhere it passed, the flying mountains were crushed into pieces. The calamity water that filled the sky was dispersed by the punch before it even landed. Chapter 605. Feng Haiyang was shocked. He didn't expect Zhang Yan's punch to be so powerful. However, he was also proud. As a Yuanying level 3 cultivator, how could he back down in front of a level 1 Yuanying level 1 cultivator? Since he had already made his move, he might as well weigh it and see how much it weighed. He released a loud shout, stirring up the vast expanse of tribulation water. In an instant, tens of thousands of waves overflowed, covering the sky and covering the earth. Turbid waves of evil energy surrounded him, causing the sky to immediately darken and the earth to become hazy. Zhang Yan looked at the calamity water that was coming at him from all directions and felt the pressure increase. However, with his strength body, he wasn't afraid of this kind of competition. Just as he was about to attack, he thought, Feng Haiyang has more tricks up his sleeves. If I were him, I would have more tricks up my sleeves. He became cautious and grabbed with both hands. The black smoke gathered around him and turned into a pair of hammers. He took a step forward, shouted, and smashed the hammers at the calamity water. His strength was so great that when the hammers smashed down, it was like a star breaking through the sky and falling onto the plains. There was a loud noise that shook the sky and the earth. The calamity water that was coming at him collapsed. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang stepped out of the calamity water. He took advantage of the pressure of the calamity water to get closer. He was only 1,000 feet away from Yi Futian. He opened his mouth and spat out a white light. When Zhang Yan saw what Feng Haiyang was doing, he could roughly guess what Feng Haiyang was going to do next. If he hesitated or closed his eyes, Feng Haiyang would definitely use the 9 nether sorrowful wind. Yi Futian's body was huge and he was trapped in the heaven and earth sealing technique. It would be difficult for him to dodge. If he was hit by the demonic wind, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. These thoughts flashed through his mind in a split second. He squinted his eyes and suddenly roared at Feng Haiyang. Boom! As this sound rang out, his body trembled for 100 li. Even the star stone rumbled. Feng Haiyang had only spat out half a foot of white light when he felt like his ears were pierced through his brain. He couldn't help but stagger. Then he flipped to the side, and with this roar, his entire body shattered. When Zhang Yan saw the white light, he felt slightly dizzy. However, this feeling was fleeting. Perhaps it was because the soul-dispersing 3-dispersing qi was not completely used, so it did not affect him much. However, just now, Feng Haiyang's actions were very strange. He thought to himself, it seems that when this person uses his divine art, his true body will appear, which is why he was shaken by my voice. Although he had guessed the secret behind it, it was still difficult for him to find Feng Haiyang. After thinking about it for a while, he swung his hammers around. He continued to bombard the tribulation water. After this series of actions, more than half of the huge waves surrounding him had already dispersed. Even far away, there was quite a bit of movement, as if he was no longer able to encircle him. Zhang Yan's eyes swept back and forth. However, he did not let his guard down. Instead, he used his mind and the sword pellet suddenly flew out from the top of his head. It released waves of light and he used the sword eye to check the surroundings. There was a deeper meaning behind this action. Although Feng Haiyang's tribulation water had a murky color, after a few fights, he could tell that it was just an illusion. It was used to confuse people. In reality, the water was colorless and formless. It could be fake or real. Only by sensing the spiritual opportunity, he could make a judgment in time. Just now, with that attack, the tribulation water within a few miles was indeed dispersed by him. However, it was not enough to destroy the tribulation water that was more than 10 miles away. It was obvious that Feng Haiyang did this on purpose to numb him and wait for an opportunity to sneak an attack. Just now, Feng Haiyang was shaken by that loud roar, and he was still a little dizzy. Although he hid in the tribulation water and tried to stand still, his body could not help but shake. He raised his hand and patted his head. He sighed and thought, my eyes, ears, mouth, and nose are all protected by spells. If my soul was intact, how could this happen? Among the 6 great demon sects, most of the spells that could injure the soul would attack from the 7 apertures. Therefore, Feng Haiyang paid a lot of attention to his own defense. If it were not for the fact that 1/3 of his soul had been destroyed by the Yang couple of Yuanyang sect, he would not be so weak. At most, he would only be distracted for a short while, and then he would be able to recover. However, now he knew that he could not get too close to Zhang Yan. Otherwise, he would be seen through by Zhang Yan's roar before he could do anything. After calming himself down, he raised his eyes and saw a bright sword light flying in the sky. He was surprised. Obviously, Feng Haiyang had already noticed his trick and was prepared for it. Feng Haiyang pondered for a while. Since his opponent seemed to be using a method of strength, he might as well let him use his advantage instead of fighting recklessly. He was afraid that Zhang Yan was eager for that to happen. He should not have done what he did before. The way of fighting was ever-changing, and there were no fixed rules. Since this way was not going to work, he might as well find another way. After comparing the advantages and disadvantages of both sides, Feng Haiyang came up with a plan in his mind. He leaped up into the sky and flew back. When he was far away, he found a flying mountain and landed on it. After he stood still, he straightened his finger and cast a spell, casting the dark battle axe in the sky. At the same time, he waved his sleeve, and the other 3 demon heads, which were refined by Jun Yang's profound qi, also appeared. He didn't expect to be able to hit Zhang Yan, but he could see that the changes were huge. Although his strength had increased greatly, to the point that he could move mountains, It was impossible for him to use the sword flight technique as it was before. Even the Dao techniques he had might not be able to be used as he wished. Zhang Yan's body was now about 600 feet tall. Even if he had a protective talisman, it might not be able to cover his whole body. Feng Haiyang did not even need to think about using mana to threaten him. He only needed to use the talisman and the demon heads to attack from a distance. Although this move could not really threaten him, even if he was a cultivator of strength path, once he was injured he would need to use up his mana to recover. As the saying goes, dripping water can wear through a stone, and rope can cut wood. There was no need to be impatient. He could wear down his spirit bit by bit, and there would be a day when it was exhausted. As for Zhang Yan, he was just like him, using talisman to attack, but he was not afraid. Other than those treasures that had spirituality, normal talisman could at most fly a mile away. At this moment he was hiding more than 10 miles away. Even if there were 1 or 2 attacks, he would be able to handle it. On the other hand, the demon heads under him were different from the dark battle axe. First, they had spirituality, and second, they had the souls of the elders in the sect. After they flew away, they could look for opportunities to attack the enemy without being controlled. He made an incantation gesture and released the restraints. The 3 devil heads and the mutant in battle axe immediately rushed forward arrogantly. At the same time, he waved his hand, and with a rumble, the tribulation water gathered again. He pointed forward, and the water overflowed. This time, he did not release it, but hung it in the sky, and used it as a deterrent. Zhang Yan saw these actions clearly and nodded to himself. Feng Haiyang was indeed extraordinary. When they fought before, he suffered a few losses, but that was because he did not know his battle strategy. Now that he was slightly familiar with it, he immediately found a way to deal with it. This demon had its own intelligence. Now that it was attacking together with the magic treasure, it was different from before. If he wanted to kill it again, it wouldn't be so easy. Furthermore, his body was so huge that even if he released the heaven and earth leaf, it wouldn't be able to cover much of it. Previously, when he turned into a giant, he borrowed the help of strength path to break through. He did not use any mana, but if he wanted to change again after returning to his original body, he would have to think about it carefully. At this moment, although he looked very majestic, his body was so huge, and the minute he used his mana was not as good as usual. This was not much of a difference, but in the eyes of a veteran like Feng Haiyang, it was enough to grasp the opportunity. With a slight thought in his mind, the heaven and earth leaf and the longevity-locking sun cicada sensed it and immediately rushed out of the aperture between his brows. The former turned into a large golden light barrier and hung above him, while the latter turned into a clear light and flew out, taking the initiative to find the dark battle axe of Samadhi. The dark battle axe immediately recognized the power of the sun-locking sun cicada, and it let out a whistle. It did not want to be entangled with it, and instead, it scuttled to the side, trying to avoid it. The clear light, however, did not want to let it go. It drew a half-arc and chased after it. The 3 devils had suffered a big loss last time, so they were a bit afraid, but they didn't dare to get too close. When they pretended to enter the inner circle, they suddenly retreated and kept circling around Zhang Yan like annoying mosquitoes. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't be driven away. After the dark battle axe circled a few times, it seemed like it was annoyed by the sun-locking sun cicada, and it suddenly turned into a shadow and disappeared into the clouds. The sun-locking sun cicada could not find its target, and it could only circle on the spot. Feng Haiyang had been watching the battle, and at this moment he felt that his chance had come. His eyes flashed, and he pressed down with his hand. With a rumble, the tribulation water that was hanging above suddenly fell down. The heaven and earth leaf suddenly trembled, and the golden light spread out. However, the tribulation water had the ability to pollute treasures, and it was extremely powerful. After resisting for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the golden light was gradually shaved off. Zhang Yan was afraid that it would be injured, and he called it back with a spell. At the same time, he flipped his palms and slapped upwards. With a bang, a force surged out, and the tribulation water that was splashing down was shattered into pieces. In the middle of the sky, a pale light suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and with a shrill whistle, it flew over quickly. With a clang, it chopped at Zhang Yan's neck, but it was repelled by his tough bones. With a sway of its body, it did not wait for the sun-locking sun cicada to come up, and it disappeared again. At the same time, the three demons saw that there was an opportunity, and they quietly slipped into the inner circle. They opened their mouths and bit at him. Zhang Yan laughed out loud, and with a sway of his body, in the blink of an eye, his huge body disappeared, and he returned to his original appearance. The three demons pounced on empty air. At this moment he was only slightly weaker than before, but his body was still as strong as metal. Moreover, he was able to use his techniques, and his flying sword was no longer a hindrance. When fighting with an enemy, there was no such thing as being passive. The only way to fight back was to fight back. He flicked his sleeve, and he turned into a ray of sword light, and flew towards Feng Haiyang. Feng Haiyang's heart trembled a little. In this kind of situation where he could only take a beating and could not fight back, he believed that as long as Zhang Yan did not want to be in a stalemate, he would definitely find a way to break the situation first. Then his chance would come. Although he had guessed what Zhang Yan was going to do next, he did not expect him to react so quickly. He almost immediately gave up his advantage, and his decisiveness shocked him. From Zhang Yan's point of view, since his weakness had been found, he no longer had an advantage. It was better to give up early than to hold on to it. That would be a useless move. In the sky, a ray of sword light shot through the sky, and arrived in front of a mountain peak. The golden light exploded, and turned into 64 wheels of swords that slashed downwards. Chapter 606. P.S. There's one more today. 64 rays of sword gleam poured down, and countless golden lights flickered on the peak like dancing fireflies. The sword aura that burst out almost shaved off a layer of soil and rocks below. After a while, Zhang Yan retracted his sword gleam and looked down. He saw that there was nothing on the cliff except for smoke and dust. It was obvious that Feng Haiyang had escaped first again. He was not surprised. Back then, Ban Xiaoming's sword transformation technique was far better than his, but he still failed to take down Feng Haiyang. It was expected that his attack did not succeed. At this moment he sensed something in his heart. He looked up and saw Feng Haiyang with his arms crossed. He had appeared on top of the calamity water in the sky. Feng Haiyang also looked over. Zhang Yan squinted his eyes. Feng Haiyang's illusory and solid transformation technique was amazing. None of the people who fought with him before could find out where his real body was. Feng Haiyang had probably covered up all the loopholes, so no one could take advantage of him. If they focused on looking for loopholes, they would be led by the nose. Since that was the case, it was time to change the method of defeating the enemy. He changed his mind and eliminated many unsuitable methods from his mind. The only method left was to have a fair and square battle of Dao techniques and mana, and see who would be able to hold on to the end. If it was someone else, they would not be able to catch up with the underworld escape technique. However, it was different for him. He had the sword escape technique and the minor universe movement technique. It was enough for him to catch up with Feng Haiyang, and he had nothing to worry about. He made up his mind and let out a roar. He flew up with the help of the sword and turned into a rainbow. He flew up along the water. On the way, there were turbid waves coming from below, trying to stop him. However, the sword escape technique was extraordinary. It was nimble and graceful. Every time there was an attack, it only took a slight turn to avoid it. After traveling for a few li, he suddenly felt his body tighten and his speed slowed down. It was obvious that he was being suppressed by the heaven and earth seal technique. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. Although he did not have a good way to deal with this move, it also meant that Feng Haiyang did not have any other way to restrain him. This divine art consumed a lot of magic power. If it was used a few more times, no one would be able to withstand it. Feng Haiyang slightly restricted Zhang Yan's movements. He took a deep look at him, then slowly sank into the tribulation water. His figure quickly disappeared. Just now when he saw Zhang Yan transform his body back, It looked like he was no longer obstructed. He immediately knew that the long-range attack method was no longer feasible. If he allowed it to chase after him, it would just be a reenactment of the situation just now. Thus, he had to change his tactics, or else he would fall into a passive position. Previously, when he fought with others, he would always take the offensive side, never taking a defensive stance. Now, he was hiding behind the water. No one would be able to find him. Instead, he would be able to attack calmly. In this way, once again, he managed to turn the situation to his advantage. Zhang Yan flew on his sword and quickly arrived above the tribulation water. He circled around the clouds and saw that the waves below were rolling and flowing non-stop. As soon as he got closer, there would be huge waves surging up. It looked extremely dangerous, and he could only think of a way to avoid it. Feng Haiyang stood in the depths of the tribulation water and looked at his actions. His eyes were especially deep as he thought to himself, "Zhang Yan, how will you deal with this?" The 6 great demon sects had paid special attention to the rising stars of the celestial sect in the past few hundred years. He had long known that Zhang Yan was a rare figure in the Qinsong school for thousands of years. He had formed a first-grade Dan and formed a nascent soul in 100 years. He could be said to be extremely talented. In the demon sect, the evaluation of him was only second to Huoxian. However, when he really fought with him, the strangeness of his Dao techniques and the number of methods he had used were far beyond his imagination. Especially since this person's fighting experience was not below his. Thus, he had already treated him as a great enemy. He judged that in the current situation, if it was someone else, they would be helpless. However, this person might have a way to deal with it. Zhang Yan circled around in the sky and his mind kept thinking of countermeasures. He looked around and saw that the tribulation water was more than 20 miles long. The 2 ends of the water disappeared into the void and merged with the clouds. He did not know where Feng Haiyang was hiding. It was almost impossible to find him. If he did not break through this situation, he would most likely be at a disadvantage in the following battles. He pondered for a moment. After a while, he seemed to have made up his mind. His expression became serious and he suddenly flew up. In a flash, he was above the sky. He stood high up and performed a spell. He activated the 5 elements supreme mystery true technique with all his might. In an instant, the imposing manner of his entire body suddenly changed. His hair danced like fire, and the dark color in his eyes grew heavier. The astral cloud above his head rumbled and roiled, emitting the sound of thunder. Gradually, a strand of red light penetrated the top of the cloud, and when it reached the sky, it illuminated the rosy clouds red. After another moment, streak after streak of crimson flame light dispersed and floated away in succession, flying out in all directions, swaying and swaying. From afar, it looked like a fire lotus was slowly blooming, and in a moment, it was already 3,000 meters in size, and it was growing larger and larger. Since Feng Haiyang was hiding in the tribulation water and did not come out, then he might as well refine the tribulation water. Let's see where else this person can hide. Suddenly, a whistling sound came from behind him. He turned his head slightly and saw that the 3 treacherous devils had already chased over. He took another glance to the side, but the dark Dan Enax was nowhere to be seen. However, it must have also followed over. It should be hiding at the side, waiting for an opportunity. When the 3 demons were about 1,000 feet away from him, they stopped advancing. They did not come up nor did they retreat. They only wandered around the outer circle. It was obvious that they wanted to use the tactic of wandering to restrain Zhang Yan. Although it was not a brilliant tactic, it could make him divert part of his attention to deal with it. Zhang Yan smiled. He took a step forward, and the water element true light suddenly rose up. The water waves were boundless, and they circled around him. If the demons dared to rush in, even if they were not pulled in by the water light, they would definitely be blocked. If that happened, he would have a way to deal with them. Feng Haiyang also felt that something was wrong. Although he did not know what Zhang Yan was trying to do, he could not allow him to continue. He urged his mana and the tribulation water beside him surged crazily. This time, It triggered a monstrous tide that had never been seen before. Zhang Yan's fire element true light needed to be activated continuously with mana. The longer it was activated, the more powerful it would be. At that moment, it had not been activated to its maximum, so he could not be stopped by anyone. He stretched out his hand and pointed downwards. Behind him, a 5-colored light rose up and a yellow ray flew out. When it was 1,000 feet away, it suddenly dispersed. Like a dam being erected, it circled around and blocked in front of him. As soon as the water came, it crashed into it. The front wave had just been broken, but the back wave had already arrived, making a rumbling sound. After all, this was Zhang Yan's distraction. It could not be compared to Feng Haiyang's full force. The earth element true light only lasted for a short while before it showed signs of exhaustion. Seeing that the fire was not completely ready, he waved his sleeve and took out the heaven and earth leaf. He was prepared to use it to resist for a while. However, this action of his revealed a flaw. A demon let out a howl and transformed into a shadow. It actually ignored the restraints of the water element true light and rushed in first. It actually successfully broke into the inner circle and bit him on the shoulder. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. Instead, he smiled and said, "I was waiting for you." He made a hand sign and a golden light shroud appeared above him, isolating the inner and outer areas. The black smoke behind him twisted into a chain and flew out. With a sound, it wrapped around the demon. The demon suddenly screamed. Its body turned from solid to intangible, then from intangible to solid again. It changed back and forth a few times, but it could not break free from the chain. Zhang Yan calmly stretched out his hand and pointed at it. A golden ray flew out from the 5-colored light and circled around the demon. Then, it returned to the distance and disappeared. Looking at the demon again, its eyes were filled with fear. After a while, it let out a whimper and turned into a ball of essence. The demon vanquishing slip on Zhang Yan's forehead trembled slightly and sucked it in. He then used his Xian Qi and the wound on his shoulder was healed. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang felt that another demon was broken in his mind. He felt that something was wrong. These 3 demons were refined by Jun Yang's essence. Even if he used his Xian Qi again, it would not be comparable to before. At this moment, he knew that he could no longer sit and wait. He had to take the initiative to attack. He stood up and leaped out of the tribulation water. In the blink of an eye, he was in the sky. He looked deeply at Zhang Yan and raised his sleeves as if he was going to use his divine sense. Zhang Yan was always paying attention to the movements outside. When he saw this, he did not think and suddenly shouted. Feng Haiyang felt a tightness in his chest and took a step back. He could not use the Dao technique anymore. However, this time, he was prepared, so he did not suffer as much as before. He immediately calmed his mind and his breath. Then, he turned into a yellow smoke and went far away. He stood still again and made a hand sign. After a while, he let out a ha, and spat out a ball of black wind from his mouth. Zhang Yan's expression became serious. This 9 nether great sorrow wind was almost invincible. If he dodged now, all his previous efforts would be in vain. He had to think of a way to block it. Fortunately, before he did it, he already had a countermeasure. He moved his body and used the black and yellow giant hand. After this giant hand flew up, it did not stop the enemy. Instead, it reached out and grabbed a flying mountain a few miles away and used it as a shield in front of him. He made another hand sign and another earth elemental true light appeared. It brushed against the mountain and immediately gathered the earth into steel. At this moment, the wind had arrived. When it collided with the mountain, it made an ear-piercing sound. Everywhere it passed, it stirred up mud and stone powder, causing the dust to scatter everywhere. At this moment, the hardness of the earth and stone was no less than gold and iron. However, it could not stop the wind at all. It was still blowing slowly. Zhang Yan saw that the wind was getting closer and closer. He then looked at the fire on top of his head. It seemed that there was still a little bit left. After thinking for a while, he flipped his palm and took out a talisman. Once this talisman was out, it immediately shone with a brilliant ray of light. It also plated his eyebrows with a layer of golden light. The spiritual qi almost caused the qi around him to ripple. No one would have thought that before Elder Shen left, he would lend Guang Yuansek's treasure, the Golden Earth Axis talisman, to him. With this talisman in hand, he would be able to resist for a while. He took a slight breath and activated it according to the method in the talisman pouch. In an instant, a magnificent golden light suddenly pierced through the clouds. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.